So we've got a lot to talk about. So feel free to, if you've got questions today, to type them into that Q&A box, and then we will answer them at some point today. And I want to meet your needs, so feel free to do that. Let's see, so I'm going to focus on the Pacific Northwest. But for those of you in other parts of the country and the world, again, give us your questions, and we want to try to answer your issues as well. So what I'm going to do first is give you a little bit of information about me, because my background's different than what you'd normally run into in this field. And you know, sometimes I mean, I always kind of hope that somebody someplace might be inspired to do the same sort of work at some point in their careers as well. So my background is that I have an undergraduate degree in psychology and biology, but then I went to graduate school in media production and journalism. And someplace along the way there, I started working for a conservation district, which is the RCD. They're called RCDs in California, but in most of the rest of the states, they're called either conservation districts or soil and water conservation districts. And working for that conservation district just changed my life. I loved what I was doing and the people I was working with, and the kind of work and the mission, I guess, that we had, which was for me to work with small acreage livestock owners and teach about natural resources management and conservation. And I worked for that conservation district outside of Seattle for a number of years. And then I started Horses for Clean Water and focused primarily on horses and horse properties, and then contracted back to work with that conservation district as well as other conservation districts in Puget Sound, and then in other parts of Washington State, and then other states, and even in other parts of the world. So it's been a great ride, and I'm very grateful for it. And by the way, it's good that we're doing this virtually, because I ended up getting sick. It's not COVID. Maybe it's that RSV, but if I have to sneeze or something, please pardon me. And my voice is scratchy, I can hear it. So Matt and I was your typical horse crazy girl, and I grew up into horse crazy adult. And I'm fortunate enough to have a husband, a partner who's head over heels as well about horses. So we both show and compete in ranch riding and reining and ranch trail, and Matt's a trainer. I'm a non-pro. We currently have 5 horses that we own. And then we also board at our place, and Matt has horses in training. And I like to tell you a little bit, participants, a little bit about our place, because, you know, I hope that, again, it might give you some ideas for managing your acreage and maybe finding ways to make some money with to monetize your property using conservation principles. So Matt and I have had 3 different horse properties over our lifetime and the time that I've been doing this work. So the first one was, and we had horses on all of them and livestock. The first one was about a half an acre, and we had 2 horses. And then the second one was in Washington. The first one was in Washington. The second one was in Washington, and we had 10 acres there. And it was like a forested wetlands for most of the land. And we had 6 to 8 horses there. And now we have 10 acres in southwestern Idaho, which is shrub steppe, land, so it's basically high desert. So it's been good to learn about different soil types and climates and native plants and things. So we run our place, Sweet Pepper Ranch, as an environmentally sensitive business. And we do different kinds of businesses there, but it's always with the premise that we're managing mud, manure, pasture, wildlife, as well as trying to provide the best for horse health. So we do short-term, we do boarding, but we also do horse motel and short-term boarding. And we have a glamping tent for human hand travelers, and that's been super fun having that. And then we do, Matt does lessons and clinics and retreats on ranch riding primarily, and horsemanship, and ranch trail. And then we also do a lot with Mustangs. So Horses for Clean Water, as I mentioned, I formed it back in Puget Sound about 1997. And it's classes, I develop educational materials, and I do farm tours and workshops, and I do a lot of individual consultations, and that works pretty well with doing them over the internet. And it's all about nature-based solutions for managing our horse properties. So I'm trying to find the least toxic solutions for the different kinds of problems that and challenges that us horse people have. And the clean water part comes from the fact that mighty runoff from horse properties can cause a lot of problems. It can cause horse health problems. It can cause decreased chore efficiency for us as horse owners. It can cause a lot of vet bills. It causes less forage production, less hay if you're growing hay, or increased vet bills. Did I say less? I meant increased. And it reduces the aesthetics for us as well as for our neighbors. And then it has environmental impacts. As you can see in these pictures, there's going to be runoff, and that runoff is going to accumulate in creeks and ditches and larger water bodies and wetlands or ponds. And it's going to be nutrients and bacteria from manure and urine, as well as sediments from mud. And these affect fish and animals that live in waterways. We call that a riparian area, the area along a creek or a pond or wetlands. And those are really rich habitats for animals. And it's important to take good care of this. And it's also important because not only does it affect the riparian animals, but it can end up affecting us because what's in the streams soaks into the groundwater and recharges our groundwater, or a mismanaged property, as the insert picture implies, a mismanaged property can have runoff that can soak into the ground and can affect your drinking water as well. So these things have impacts that can affect us as well as the wildlife. So Horses for Clean Water is about nature-based solutions that are going to be good for our horses, for us, because they're chore efficient, good for the productivity of our properties, good for the aesthetics of our properties. It's going to help save us money because it's making our properties more productive, and we're reducing vet bills. And then it's going to conserve the natural resources. So let's jump into today's, this morning's first presentation. And what we're going to look at in this presentation is how to go from the top picture to the bottom picture. And that's actually the same horse property. It was our 10-acre piece in the Puget Sound area in Maple Valley, Washington. And the top picture is literally what it looked like on the day that we moved in. And there was a lot of mud and a lot of manure, and we were having one of the big Thanksgiving Day storms at the same time. And the bottom picture is probably about 10 years down the road, 7 to 10 years. And I like to point out that it's not like the next day or 6 months down the road, but that these things take time, and it's a journey. And and you're trying to do the best on your journey as you go along. And it's not like we expect everything to get figured out right away. Okay, so some of the problems, let's talk for a few slides about, go into a little bit more detail about how these not having a mud manure pasture management plan can be problematic for us. So if you've got a lot of mud on your place and you're feeding on the ground, your horses are at risk of ingesting soil particles, and that puts your horses at risk for sand colic. And as probably most of us know, colic is the #1 killer of horses, and there's several different reasons that horses can colic, but ingesting sand particles is one of them. And those particles can accumulate in their gut, and they can cause impactions. They can cause a twisted gut, or they can just cause general unthriftiness and intermittent diarrhea. And there's other horse health issues. There's insects. There's even hypothermia. A horse that's standing in mud, it can lower their body temperature and make them more stressed and less resistant to diseases, or require that they have to eat more food to stay warm. But there's bacteria that cause abscesses. There's fungal organisms that cause thrush. And then chore efficiency. Mud is no fun for us horse owners, as many of us know, and it can make it really difficult to do chores. No fun to catch your horses or clean up your horse to go for a ride. And it's part of why horse owners end up getting a bad rap, is because their places often look like this, our places. And I say our because this was our first winter here in Treasure Valley in southwestern Idaho. As I mentioned, it's a desert here, and it only gets 7 to 10 inches of rain. And when we moved here in 2010, there weren't any natural resource agencies that were working with horse owners. So I couldn't get any guidance on how to deal with the soil. And I thought, well, it's the desert. Maybe it doesn't get wet in the wintertime. Well, welcome to clay and silty soil. And this is what the winter looks like on the desert, in the desert. And that first winter, I was kind of worried that maybe I had met my match, but we'll talk about our place as we go along. So when we have mud on livestock properties, like any of these pictures here, the streams in these pictures, or the ditches, some of them are just ditches, or intermittent water paths, they carry away the nutrients and sediments from urine and manure and mud, and it gets into bigger and bigger bodies of water. And the way it affects fish and aquatic life, in particular, the fish like salmon and trout that spawn in streams, the silt collects in the streams and it settles over the eggs, and then it suffocates the eggs. They can't get enough oxygen from the water. And the silt in the water also makes the water darker, which attracts more sunlight and heats up the water. And then you get more algae. Hot water can't hold as much oxygen. You get more algae, which depletes the oxygen further. And pretty soon, your fish that live there need scuba gear in order to survive. And then there's the issue of, the polluted water potentially recharging the groundwater and causing problems for humans as well. So mud and runoff on horse properties, livestock properties are problematic in so many different ways: for horse health, for convenience, for productivity, for aesthetics, as well as for the natural world around us. So let's look at some solutions. So what I'm going to talk about in this talk is about 5 different main categories for mud and drainage control on horse properties. I'm going to talk about location. I'm going to talk about picking up manure regularly. We're going to make that a short part of this talk, and we're going to expand on that in the next talk. We're going to talk about footing options, rainwater, and surface water. So the first one is location, and it's kind of like what they say in real estate. Location is everything. And the main thing that you want to think about in managing a horse property is your confinement area and the location of your confinement area. And a confinement area is sometimes, it's your horse's outdoor living quarters. It's sometimes what we call a sacrifice area, or a paddock, or a corral, or a winter paddock. There's any number of names, turnout, pen, and you are sacrificing, sorry, my voice does really sound funny. You are sacrificing this piece of ground here as pasture, and you recognize that pasture is never going to grow on it, grass is never going to grow on it, and that you're going to have to do certain things to mitigate it so it doesn't turn into mud and manure. But this becomes your horse's outdoor living quarters and the heart of your whole pasture management program. It almost doesn't matter how much land you have. You really need to have a confinement area, because it helps you so that your horses don't become overweight, because they become overweight so easily on pasture. And it also helps so that your pastures don't get overgrazed in the summer, and so that you can keep your horses off of the pasture in the winter time when the pastures are dormant and the soils are soggy. So in order to have horses, you need to have a confinement area, and they need more than a stall. They need a confinement area where they can get out and move around and have stimulation. All right, let's see. So let's look at some location problems. First of all, just going back to this picture, you want to locate your stalls and barn or shelter, whatever you have, on high, well-draining ground, and you want to slope your paddocks away from your stalls, and then you want to have a grassy buffer surrounding your paddocks. And the grassy buffer is actually something high tech. It's called a biofiltration area, and it filters out in case you do have any runoff off of your confinement area. It'll get filtered out by the biofiltration area. So here's some problems, some problem locations first. So this one, the barn is in the lowest spot, and the paddocks slope down into the barn. So when you get like torrential rain or really any kind of rain, it's going to end up down into the barn, and the barn becomes the soup bowl, basically. You know, because it's collecting water at the bottom part. Here's another challenge of locations. So this property, it's really an interesting one, and it's why I always tell people that they should look at the big picture. You should look at, if you're buying horse property, you should look at it in the winter, in the rainiest part of the year, and you should look at the big picture, not just the property. So this was a lovely horse property. It was, I can't remember if it was, I think it was 5 or 6 acres. And it looks, you know, relatively flat right here. But the thing was, is they were in a development and it sloped up behind it and was undeveloped when they bought this. And each of those evergreens uses like 250 gallons of water a day per tree, and it continues to do so. Evergreens do in the wintertime as well. So as they slowly started developing this area, they cut down trees and they put in more impervious surfaces. It just comes with the, you know, with the picture. So there's more driveways, more roads, more roofs, and less trees and soil to use up the water. And so it all ended up at the bottom of the hill, which was these people's property. And I don't have the second picture here, but how they had to mitigate it was they actually had to designate a big part of their property as wetlands and plant it with wetlands plants. And it wasn't really a wetlands, but it became that way because all the water in the area was draining onto it. So another location choice issue, this was our property in Maple Valley. And the previous owners, this is what it looked like when we moved in. And the previous owners had put the barn in the lowest part of the property. And so what that meant was that the subsurface water as well as surface water all ran right towards that barn. And as you may have heard me just mention, when we moved in, it was at Thanksgiving. And there's like always a Thanksgiving Day storm in Puget Sound. And I mean, I again thought I had met my match, and we had really just started with Horses for Clean Water, but the inside of the barn probably had 6 inches or more standing water in it, and water just bubbled up from the ground everywhere. And here's another example of a location choice that none of us in the natural resources industry want to see, because this is a horse property like 2 feet from a stream, and it actually is a salmon spawning stream. So there's no way that you can not be impacting the fish and riparian life in that stream. It's going to be heavily impacted with fecal coliform and other bacteria and sediments, which are not healthy for the fish. So by the same token, you still want a little bit of slope. We had so much slope in Maple Valley that when I moved, in my mind, all I wanted was something flat. Well, you know, you got to be careful what you wish for, because we got a place here in Treasure Valley that's really flat. So a lot of times that makes a big challenge for us in trying to get drainage when it's that flat. And then you don't want too much slope. You want slope, but not too much. We'll talk about this place in a little bit. They dealt with the amount of slope that they have, but literally, as you can see here, their property is on the side of a hill. And at the bottom of the hill is Bear Creek, which is a very important salmon spawning stream in Puget Sound. So here's an example of what you do want. You want some slope, and you want to have grassy buffer below. You want to have slope, and you want to be able to control where any potential water is going to run off. There's also other mud management techniques in place here, which we will be talking about, but this was our place in Maple Valley, and we had gravel footing in here. Just having footing helps slow the flow, helps absorb water back into the ground. And then the footing helps reduce erosion so that you don't have that going on. But just a little explanation here, we had hot tape as the bottom fence for this sacrifice area. And that really made it nice and shore efficient, because we could divide this pasture, which was actually a pretty small pasture. It was probably just like a half an acre, maybe a little more. But during most of the summer, this picture was like the beginning of the fall, but we would divide the pasture into thirds, long runs. And then we could just take that hot tape down, and for the time of the day that we wanted our horses to graze the pasture, we could just let them into that area, and then we could do rotational grazing. When this strip was down to 3 to 4 inches, the next day we'd use the middle strip and use that for a week or so until that was grazed down, then use this one. And then by that time, the first one would have grown back. And then again, this pasture also acts as your biofiltration area to filter out any potential nutrients or runoff that does come off of your sacrifice or confinement area. Here's another good example. Paddocks are sloping away from the barn, and you have grass surrounding it. Another example of good slope with a grassy buffer below. Barn is in a high, well-drained area. And then just a few other examples of confinement areas. Confinement areas, it's just going to depend on what your needs are, how many horses, their age, their breed, their temperament, how much exercise they get. This young lady who owned this place, she was like 87 when I took this picture, and she had all her life, she had ponies that she drove, and she had 8 or 9. They had individual pens. And then in the summer, they went out together on pasture. In the winter, they went out together in the middle of the day for turnout in her arena. And panel fencing is more expensive, but it also has, it's more durable, it's never going to rot, and they can't chew it up. And then it's flexible because you can make pens smaller if you got an injured horse. Yeah, and it's fireproof, which is really important in fire-prone areas. And here's another example of a paddock with group turnout. So we have a couple of these places on our property, which is particularly important if for when we have young horses. We like them to be able to move around more and interact with each other. And confinement areas can, it's kind of like the sky's the limit. There's track paddocks, there's lots of scenarios like this one. This gentleman, his confinement area doubled as his arena and round pen. So you can be very creative, and especially if you have small acreage, you can make facilities form dual purposes. Okay, my second mud management technique is to pick up manure on a regular basis. And I'm not going to talk too much about that right now because my next talk will go into that in more detail. But not picking up manure leads to more mud. Mud is fine organic, or manure is fine organic material. And the job in life for fine organic material is to hold moisture. And scientifically, it's something like 200 to 400 times its weight in moisture is what it holds. So it's basically, manure is like a sponge. And this was a property that I saw one month when they had just renovated this nice confinement area, nice big turnout confinement area, and they had 2 drafty horses in it. And I came back exactly a month later, and I bet they never picked up manure once. And so all that good footing that they had in there, everything was just a total loss. And they're going to have to start over again, blade it all out, and redo that confinement area. And my big thing is that I'm a huge fan of compost and the values that it brings to our property is amazing. And so we'll talk about that in a whole presentation today. Okay, so my third mud management and drainage technique is to use footing in your confinement areas, as well as in your high traffic areas. And I've already sort of been mentioning that. So the picture on the left, that's 5/8 minus crushed rock. And the one on the right is coarse washed arena sand. So both of them are really good footings. Usually you don't want to use any kind of wood product. Wood products are harder to find these days. There are many types of wood that are toxic. So you want to be really careful. And then the third thing about wood products is that they decompose very quickly. And then you just end up with more fine organic material, which, as I just said, is mud. So you end up with more of a problem to deal with. So it's basically some type of gravel product that you're going to want. The 5/8 minus, well, let's just go to the next slide and I'll talk some more about these. 5/8 minus crushed rock. So there's different names for this. First of all, on the size, generally less than an inch is what you want. Your horses are usually not comfortable if it's much bigger than an inch. But it's going to depend on your area. I found that in Puget Sound, it was like a smorgasbord of footing products. You had almost so many to choose from. And the same way in many parts of California, there's so many cool products, like different kinds of granulithic that work really well. Here, when we moved to Treasure Valley, we had something they called, I think it was called Landowners Blend or Driveway Blend or something like that. And it was 1 1/4 minus, and it was just like big round rocks. It was 1 1/2 inch actually, and it was not very nice for our horses to stand on, and they had to we had to shop around a lot to find some kind of good solution. But 5/8 minus crushed rock is kind of the gold standard in what works best for horse properties. The minus means that you've got the largest piece is going to be 5/8 of an inch, and then you have all the way down to the sand size particles in it, and that's the minus. If you wanted it to drain better, you could get 5/8 clear, or sometimes they call it washed, and that means that it's only 5/8 of an inch, and you don't have any of the smaller particles. Now, the advantage and disadvantage of each of those, the minus kind of helps the little pieces of gravel to lock in place so they don't migrate as much. The washed will drain better, but it also tends to migrate more. So if you have any slope, you probably want the minus in there. So hopefully that helps you. Here's another kind of footing, manufactured sand. I think it probably has different names, but basically, and I should mention this, you go from quarry to quarry. I mean, I could go here to 3 different quarries that are within 5 miles of me, and they'd have different names for the same, what I would call the same product. So you got to go and look at it and talk to them and, you know, ask to see the product, and maybe ask if you can talk to or see a place where they've utilized it, a horse property. So in Maple Valley, my horse Bob in this picture, he developed laminitis. So we wanted to create a pen for him with sand, because that's better for horses that are laminitic. It's more evenly supports their foot and their frog. So instead of getting regular sand, which is round, I wanted to get manufactured sand, which is sand that's left over from sizing or grinding other products. So it's a little more angular. All of it gets worn down over time and is going to get rounder and dustier. But this is going to stay in place a little bit better. It was a little more expensive, but you know, anything for Bob. Let's see. Here's another example of sand. This is coarse washed arena sand. That's what we've been able to find here in Treasure Valley, Idaho. What we've done in a lot of cases is put in the landowners or the driveway gravel first. And because we have that clay soil, it just kind of sinks into it. And then on top of that, we put the coarse washed arena sand. And horses love sand. Traditionally, it's what equestrians have been using, you know, forever. I always shied away from it in the early years. I shied away from it, and I didn't encourage class participants to use it because of the concern for sand colic. So what we've had to do is talk about using feeders where horses aren't going to get their hay dirty. So, you know, here in Idaho, we were sweeping our stalls every time we feed, and we feed 3 times a day. And, you know, we have a bunch of horses here, so it was kind of getting to be a big hassle. So what we wound up doing was we went to pro panel feeders. There's many different kinds of feeders, but these are feeders that where you can feed them and they can eat with their head down, which is good for their respiratory system. But then they're not going to get their hay sandy and dirty. Here's another example of footing in a high traffic area. What we did in this big confinement area, it was too big to put footing over the whole thing. So we just put footing. I mean, it's too big because it was expensive, too expensive for us to afford. So we just put footing in either end where we feed the horses. So at this end, and then at that end where the water and the shelter are. And then if it rains or snows and melts, then we use hot tape, and we confine them just in that high traffic area, because otherwise it'd just be a mess like it was in that first picture that you saw. So I also, when we're talking about footing, I like to remind people to set up your place so that you have the right type of gates and fencing. It's almost like as a horse person that you can never have too many gates, because you need to get in to refresh that footing every fall. The spots where it gets compacted, like if usually in the highest traffic areas, you probably want to get another couple of loads in of sand. And so you need to have gates or the ability to open up your pens, your confinement areas, and get deliveries. Other ways that you can other footing options, trailer mats, they kind of have grooves in them. If you've got gravel footing, it will compact, and you can put trailer mats like stall mats in front of your stalls, and that really helps. Like act like a doormat, so it helps so that the dirt from the outside doesn't get tracked in. And if you have shavings, it helps slow down the shavings as far as them getting outside. And you can use stall mats in high traffic areas. This is stall mats used in the loafing areas here. And you can see they've got it underneath and it's pouring down rain in that picture too, I might mention. So they've got stall mats underneath the roof as well as outside, and kind of as an apron or skirt around it. Oh, and I might mention, we'll be talking about gutters and downspouts in a few minutes, and you might notice how they're protecting them here. And so here's stall mats in the loafing area right outside of the stalls as well. And what I wanted to point out here is that they have them framed in, and the advantage to that is then they don't start migrating and moving around. A little bit about geotextile products. There are many out there. The one that I've seen that really seems to work the best is Lighthoof. And the way it works is it is a geogrid kind of product, but it's flexible. Apparently a version of it was used to build roads. And the way it works is you get it in those panels like you saw in the last slide, and you stretch the panel out and you Velcro them together. You stretch it out over geotextile fabric, and then you put in washed rock that's going to drain. And then what it does is these panels hold the rock in place so it doesn't migrate and so it doesn't compact. So that helps with reduce, when it's not compacted, then it will still drain. And that helps a lot with erosion control. And here's that example I said we'd come back to. This place, it was quite expensive, but they have that Lighthoof under every square inch of their paddocks here. And it's the only way you can keep that footing in place and not have erosion and mud everywhere. Here's another example. You could just use Lighthoof in your highest traffic areas, like around the coffee pot. Okay, my fourth point for mud management is about dealing with rainwater. So I got a couple of different techniques and ideas for dealing with the water that's falling from the sky. But environmentally, you want to think about rainwater as being clean, and you want to protect it, and you don't want it to get contaminated on your property, and you don't want it to turn into more mud for your horses. So you want to have gutters and downspouts on every building, and then you want to divert that water away. So I don't know if you guys want to maybe take a screenshot of this formula here, but I thought I'd give you the formula for determining how much water runs off of your barn or any roof. And this formula works, it's like a magic formula. It works everywhere in the world. And it's just number of number of inches of annual rainfall for your area. You can just Google that. And then by the number of square feet of roof surface times the magic number 0.62, and that'll tell you the number of gallons per year. And using the picture in the beginning, using this barn, so she has two 12 by 12 stalls on this side. So that's 12 by 24 is the roof. And it's in Western Washington, where it's 40 inches of rain a year, in where she lives. By 288, that's 24 by 12 for her square roof. That's just that half of the barn, times the magic number 0.62. And she has 7,000 gallons of water a year that comes off of half of her barn. So, almost 15,000 gallons of water a year comes off of her barn. So with that clean rainwater, you want to keep it clean. You don't want it to end up causing more problems for you. So you want to divert it to someplace else on your property, and you want it to go back into the footprint of your property and recharge your aquifer. So what they did was they had gutters, downspouts. The downspouts then are tight lined underneath, underneath the driveway. And then here's the outlet. And basically what's behind me are trees and native shrubs, and it's all on their property. So you wouldn't want to like send it to your neighbor and cause more problems. You wouldn't want to send it into a creek or a pond or wetlands, because it's going to change the volume and the level of water there too quickly if you do that. And then plus, if you're sending it away, you're not recharging your groundwater. And even even with all the rain that California has gotten this year, it's done something for surface water and recharging a lot of the reservoirs, but we really don't know what it's done for groundwater and things like the Colorado River and all. So out west, we are having a mega drought, and we need to keep our groundwater and our aquifers happy. So here's another cool example. She did an awesome job. So Marcy has cattle here, and this is her confinement area, and she has gutters and downspouts, and then her downspouts, they go underground and they come out here, and then this is where they're outletted. And basically what's right here, it's all native plants. This picture was early in the spring, so things hadn't started growing, but it's just a little swale of native plants. And another thing she did was she's got a screen over the outlet, which the last place didn't have. And you totally want to do that, because if you don't have a screen there, you are going to get a mouse that comes in the summer and sets up camp, and then it all that time and money and effort is plugged up. So here's on our property. We made sure we had gutters, and they go to the back of the barn, and downspouts here, and there's a vegetated swale there that the horses aren't in, and that's where the roof runoff goes on our property. Here's some other examples of what you can do with roof runoff. This place was in Canada, and they had rain barrels, and rain barrels are so common these days and easy to get and to put in place. Cisterns are another great idea. You do want to get engineering help, because man, these crazy things get so heavy when they're full of water. And if you don't have the pad underneath them level, and just so they can be dangerous. And you also want to make sure about things like mosquitoes and all, because the standing water in these kinds of situations can be mosquito habitat. Here's another example of what to do with roof runoff. So they've got gutters, downspouts, they're tight lined under the driveway, and then basically they made like a drain field here, like you do for a septic system. And this is in their pasture. So that's awesome. It's downslope. It's going to drain towards the pasture. Here's another example. So now what I want to highlight is protecting those downspouts. So we go to all the trouble of putting in gutters, downspouts, and our crazy animals are going to come and itch on them. Excuse me, if we don't protect them. So you can protect them with PVC pipe, with hot tape. We saw a little while back my friend Patricia's place, where she built boards around it. So there's many different ways that you can protect your downspouts so that your horses don't lean on them and itch on them. And here's another idea for rainwater thresholds. What a big difference they make. You know, like rainwater gets everything wet, and then the horses just drag it into their stall. If they just have to pick up their feet, it helps to keep some of the sand and footing out of their stall. And these plastic freezer curtains are super awesome for keeping the rain out of stalls as well. Okay, my last point, and I think we're about right. I think we are about 10 minutes from the end, so I think I'm okay. So my fifth point is different ways to deal with surface water. So that is once the rain has hit the ground and it's going to go someplace. And I'm going to talk about slowing the flow, French drains, dry wells, water bars, grassy swales, pervious surfaces, and trees and shrubs. So, for example, in this picture, the barn and paddocks are in a lower area, and you've got a hill and lawn and driveway that kind of slopes toward it. So the first line of defense that they're doing is slowing the flow. And sometimes that is all you need. And what that means is by putting down gravel and having lawn or pasture, that's enough to slow the water flow down so that maybe it'll soak back into the ground and not be as much of an issue. So your first number one technique should always be looking at slowing the flow and seeing if perhaps that's enough. French drains are a real popular option. I want to emphasize a few things about that. There are a lot of work to put in, and you have to maintain them or they'll break down. And then the other thing is that you want them to be in an area of no foot traffic, because if you do have traffic, they are going to break down. The sides are going to break down. It's basically just a deep trench dug into the ground, and you dig down into the impervious layers of soil. And then you just put in drain rock. You put in a pipe in there, perforated pipe, and drain rock. And then you have to have a high end and a low end. And then the water flows to the path of least resistance. So it's going to be easy for the water to flow into that pipe and then flow slightly downhill. In this picture, this property is at the bottom of a slope. There's development above it, which wasn't there when they first moved in. They didn't have gutters and downspouts. And when they had the conservation district out, they were having so much water running into this little covered arena that it was just like hitting the barn and tack room walls like a wave and then soaking into those built stalls and the tack room. So we recommended putting in gutters and downspouts, putting them into a French drain, and creating a French drain. So the high end of the French drain's on this end, and the low end is actually way out in front of the house, and that's where it outlets to. And it made a huge difference for them. If you're going to go to all the trouble to put in a French drain, do get engineering help. Contact your RCD or your conservation district, because they may be able to help you with that. And a lot of times they have engineering assistance that they can provide. But you need a laser level, you need an engineer, and you need to go into the impervious layer of soil. You need to go down pretty deep. So I've mentioned about our first property. I mean, it was actually our second property in Maple Valley. And this is what it looked like when we moved in, and it was in a low part of the property. So we had subsurface and surface water. The French drain was paramount for solving that issue. So this stall we turned into a dog run. And we put the French drain starting in the dog run stall, coming across the front of the barn. We took out that shavings bin and we put the French drain across the whole front of the property there. So in the lower picture, it goes through the, oops, I can't click. It goes through the dog run, around in front of the barn, in front of this paddock, and then it goes out into the pasture underground. And then that's where it allowed the water to soak into the pasture. And it had to go into the impervious layer, and the trench at this part was more than 6 feet deep. I stood in it and it was over my head. Okay, so another way to deal with surface water as well as subsurface is, besides French drains, is dry wells. So a dry well is a big hole in the ground filled with drain rock. It's only going to work if you're on a property that has a low water table. So if you are, for example, someplace where your groundwater is, if you dig a hole and it fills up with water, it's not going to work in the wintertime to have a dry well. But here's an example. We put dry wells in around all of our water hydrants so that it doesn't become muddy around our dry wells. But I've seen roof runoff systems that go into dry wells and work real well. So water bars, those are super cool. It's like a speed bump for water. So a friend of mine who had horses, he took stall mats. He had leftover pieces of stall mats trying to fit them into his barn. And they were like, I think about a foot wide. He attached them to a board. That's called like a dead man. And then you bury the board, and just like 4 or 6 inches of the stall mat is sticking up here. So he could still drive his car over it and get up his driveway. But when it rained really hard, water would come down and hit that stall mat and then be diverted into the grass here on the side. And I said, hey, Alan, how did you ever think of that? And he said, I just got tired of having all of my new driveway gravel end up down the road at my neighbor's house. So here's another example of a stall or of a water diversion bar another friend of mine had. So this was her barn. And again, it's in Idaho where it doesn't really rain that much usually. But when it would rain, the storm water would hit this impervious surface and it would all run into her barn. So she just got, it's basically curbing blocks and put them all along here. And so the water hits this and then it runs into this vegetated area. And you could boost this and plant more plants in here if you want, but this worked for her. Here's another way to deal with surface water runoff. And this is a culvert. And what he did was he put it, his confinement area over here was like what happens with a lot of confinement areas, it gets compacted. So it wasn't draining anymore, which is what happens in compacted areas. So he put a culvert under his driveway from the confinement area. So now that's dirty water, or we call it storm water. And then he put it into basically a biofiltration system. He planted native plants and plants and had a dry creek kind of thing. And he has that storm water going through all of this, and then it daylights into a pasture on the other side. So all of that is good. So I am a big fan of using native trees and shrubs. And that's because they love to grow and they've been adapted to our region or your region and your climate and your microclimate. And they're not going to need fertilizer. They're not going to need extra special care beyond a little extra water for the first couple of years. And then they're going to be good to go. They're going to be resistant to diseases and pests, and they're going to provide a habitat for the native insects and animals that are in your area. And many of them are going to be really good as mud managers. They like to have their feet wet in the wintertime, and then they don't mind when it dries out in the summer. So, as I mentioned before, a mature evergreen can drink up to 250 gallons of water per day. The cool thing about evergreens is they keep using water in the wintertime. They don't go dormant like deciduous trees do. So they're really good at mud managers. Another idea for stormwater management is, or for surface water management, is rain gardens. Rain gardens are awesome. Washington State University has a great document. It's online and free about how to build a rain garden. It's for urban audiences, but us horse people are clever and we can figure out how that will work for us. But this is an example of a rain garden off of a barn. So a rain garden is basically compost and mulch, and then plants that like to have their feet wet. And then this is the water that collects in it. And the idea is not a pond. It's just to collect that water and then let it slowly soak back into the footprint of your property over like 24 hours or maybe 48 hours. Here's another idea. This is biofiltration using native plants. This is also in Washington. This is on the San Juan Islands, and they are using native plants to control stormwater, which is dirty. So the runoff from the streets here run into this area of native plants. And the plants and the soils can help break down petrochemicals and other chemicals and keep it from running into Puget Sound. So us horse owners can take these principles and implement them as well. Here's another example of biofiltration, and this is in also in Puget Sound. And the runoff from this road here is going into these biofiltration areas alongside of, you know, it used to be, this area used to be called the Hell Strip. So they took, you know, the Hell Strip, that's the area between the sidewalk and the road that like dogs pee on and nobody takes care of, and it doesn't get watered and it dries out and is ugly. So the city of Seattle in certain areas took that out and they put in rain gardens, basically biofiltration areas with native plants. So now these areas are going to filter out pollutants and then provide habitat for insects and beneficial animals, little animals. So I think that's, you know, just cool for us to think about and implement these ideas on our horse properties. And here's something that we did on our horse property that's combining all of these ideas of using native plants. So remember these pictures now, and we're going to go forward. So this is what our place looked like when we first moved in. So you can see all the neighbors and you can see all the mud, and there's absolutely zero habitat for any native insects or animals or birds or anything. And it's just, you know, disgusting for the horses. And we only get 7 to 11 inches of rain here too. So here is what we did, and we did this right away. I bought more mature trees, which are more expensive, and you don't have to do that. But so there's this little hillside, and we pulled the horses off of that. We took the fencing down, and we put the fencing at the bottom of the little hillside and planted all these trees and shrubs. And then this is basically what it looked like a year or so afterwards. So the plants here act as biofiltration or filter of any rainwater, so they can absorb it back up into the groundwater. They provide habitat, and then they're also going to provide shade and a windscreen and a visual barrier and more aesthetics. So that's a couple years later, and this is in the winter time here. So, and I have evergreens in there so that they're using water year round. And then this is literally, well, it's not today, but it was last summer. So it's huge now, and it just doesn't even look like the same place. I'll go back real quick because I think the visual is important here. There, that's 13 years ago. And that's today. Big difference, right? Okay, so just to review what we learned about here, hopefully for you guys, was 5 ways to deal with mud and drainage on horse properties. Location is one. Picking up manure regularly is another. Footing options is another. Ways to deal with rainwater, primarily gutters and downspouts, and then all sorts of different ways to deal with surface water. So mud and drainage management will help keep our horses healthier, our land healthier. It'll make our places something that we can all be proud of as well. So I've got a few resources listed here that Horses for Clean Water has. That QR code there will take you to sign up for the newsletter. We put out a newsletter every 2 or 3 months, and it has upcoming events as well as different articles and photos of places. It's really good information, and I encourage everybody to, I know we all get a lot of emails, but if these things are interesting to you, it's free, and it's some good help for all of that. The Sweet Pepper Ranch, we have a website if you're traveling and you need a horse motel, and I also do consultations as well. So Terry, that's it.
All right. Nice job.
Thank you. And I'll stop sharing.
You have a number of questions, probably a lot you've already answered, but I'll just go through them. So Brian asks, what type of footing are you recommending for the paddock area? And I think you kind of went over that, but if you want to add anything to the.
Either gravel or sand, horse washed arena sand or gravel. What horses would prefer is like 1/2 inch to 1 inch is what they'd like to stand on. And if you get it crushed with the minus in it, it won't migrate as much. If you get it crushed and washed so that everything is all the same size, it'll drain better.
Okay. And then Kathy asked, do you put any landscape fabric under the gravel slope sacrifice area, which you did address?
Yeah, you don't have to necessarily. Some conservation districts will require that for cost sharing. So it just kind of depends on your soil types. If you've got really organic soils, like real mucky soils, or a lot of clay, you might want to do that. So there's 2 ways we could have done our property to begin with. We could have put down geotextile fabric and then put the footing on it. But that's more expensive, and we didn't have the money for it. And I didn't know that I'd really need to do that. So we put down the gravel first. And we, in the end, I'm sure we spent as much or more putting down gravel every year because it sunk into the clay. But if you had geotextile there, it would keep it from sinking into it, and it'd separate that out. So, it's 6 to 1 and 1/2 dozen the other in some cases.
Yeah. Okay. Rick is asking, how large a confinement area per horse do you recommend? Confinement areas adjacent to grassy pasture slide.
Yeah, so that's kind of like saying how long is a piece of string. It depends on how many horses, their age, their breed, their temperament, how much land you have, how much exercise your horses get. Big is good, but you don't want them too big because then you have more area to clean each day for chores, and you have to pay for more footing and more fencing. So it just depends on your situation as to what's going to work best for you. I can work with people individually, or your RCD can help you, or your conservation district can help you with that more.
Okay, great. Catherine asks, can you talk a bit about picking up or managing manure in the grass areas? Okay to drag to break up the manure piles? Do you recommend time for grass areas after lime application? Should horses be kept off? How long? I'm in central New York State. Are you going to be covering some of that in the compost talk?
Not so much.
Okay.
I cover that in pasture management. You don't have to pick up manure in pasture because there we can harrow it and drag it, and that breaks it up. And breaking it up then allows it so that the plants can utilize it and break it down more. I would only pick up manure in grassy areas if they were actually more of a confinement area and not being managed as a pasture. And then as far as liming is only to raise, to change the pH. And you only need to lime if your soils are requiring that. So what I would recommend, since you're in New York, I'd recommend that you talk to your conservation district or your extension office there and find out how to check the pH of your soil and find out if you need lime. That's all lime is for pH. And then as long as you're using dolomite lime, it's not going to hurt the horses. But usually what you want to do is lime in the fall when you're taking the horses off the pasture anyway.
Okay, great. Okay, and then Rick kind of has a dual question here. Is decomposed granite an option for confinement area? And then how deep is gravel in how deep should gravel be in a confinement area?
Okay, yeah. Decomposed granite is often called DG, and yeah, that works great for confinement areas as long as it's not huge, like if the pieces are less than an inch. And you want footing to be like 3 to 6 inches deep. It just depends on your soil and what it's going to be like in the wintertime.
Okay. Deborah's asking, do you have any experience with using fungi to filter runoff? We're considering building hugelkultur rows at our sanctuary between our animal areas and the creek, and are thinking of inoculating them with mushrooms due to their ability to detoxify all sorts of things. I kind of cover that in my
do it. Terry's going to talk about that in a little bit, but I don't have experience with doing it, but I've seen a lot of research, and fungus is amazing, and they use fungi to filter all sorts of cool things like toxic wastes and road runoff and stuff. So yeah, do it, and pay attention to Terry's talk. She'll give you some more tips. I see the next person is worried about my cold, and thank you.
That's sweet. Thank you.
Sorry to make you guys suffer through my squeaky voice.
Kathy's asking, what type of gutters do you recommend? Mine were pulled off the barn by sliding snow and ice, northern Utah. And she's on rented property.
Oh, gutters aren't, it just depends on how big your building is. They aren't usually too much of an investment. And you just want to make sure that your company that's doing it, is aware of how much snow load is in your area. And I hear people all the time say, oh, we can't have gutters and downspouts because it snows. And let me tell you, I've been through Canada and Alaska, and I've lived in Montana and these places. And if they can figure out how to have gutters that work on those places, we can in Utah and Idaho. You just are going to have to make certain accommodations for it. There's different things that you can do if you've got snow and ice. Yeah.
Okay. And then I think I hope I'm not pronouncing this incorrectly. Glenye, thank you so much for all this great presentation. Much appreciated. I can't stay for the entire day, and I'm looking forward to the recording. Thank you. And Catherine's thanking you as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice job. So yeah, folks, keep the questions coming in the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end of each presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and try my best with screen sharing now. Okay, how's that look, Alayne? Is that?
Yeah, that looks great, Terry. I can
Okay.
see it.
All right, good. All right. Bring one thing else up here. Sorry, I'm being a little challenged this morning with all the screen sharing. Too many things on my screen. Okay. Okay, so hello again, everyone. What I'd like to share with you today are a couple of specific ways to help you think about dealing with flooding and drought. The first is about the importance of growing healthy soil, and the second is a swale project that I completed that almost anyone can replicate for issues relating to erosion control, drought, or flooding. So this first picture is a Google Earth shot of the 6-acre small farm where I live. And this must have been taken a number of years ago because we currently have a lot more trees, and you can see the mowing lines in the pastures, and we no longer mow using heavy equipment. Instead, for the past 6 years, my 3 adjoining neighbors and I have been implementing a regenerative grazing plan. We now graze horses, sheep, goats, and cattle. Managing the grazing patterns of horses and other animals can be the most effective way for those of you who own or have access to land to grow quality soil and its ability to infiltrate water, thereby recharging groundwater, which is actually immediately pertinent to us well users, but also to sequester carbon, provide nutritious high quality forage that lasts longer into the growing season, and to have land that is therefore more resilient during times of drought and flooding. So in order to understand why healthy soil is critical to preventing both flooding and drought, we need to understand what healthy soil is, how healthy soil is made, and then how we can help it grow. So I'm going to give you a brief and very simplified overview in hopes that it inspires you to take steps toward acquiring a little more information and improving the health of your soil. So now, as I mentioned, you will automatically receive a resource sheet with links to more specific details on what I'm sharing with you today. And of course, you're welcome to put any questions that come up into the Q&A. So everyone has a soil type that's unique to their area, but all soils are made up of some combination of sand, silt, and clay. And it's possible to improve the health and function of any soil type by the manner in which you graze your horses. So what we normally see when we are observing a grazing pasture are the visible plants or grasses growing on top of the soil. Grass grows by capturing energy from the sun through its leaves or blades. The roots below ground take in rainwater and nutrients from the soil that further enable the grass to grow. In this photo of Alayne's farm in Idaho, the grass is covering the ground well, providing shade and stabilizing the ground temperature. The grass is also essential to preventing moisture from evaporating out of the soil. Retaining moisture and maintaining a soil temperature of around 70 degrees Fahrenheit are both vital for the survival of literally billions, if not trillions, of microorganisms, worms, and insects that live in the soil and eat minerals and organic matter, such as horse manure. By eating these nutrients, these living organisms break them down so that they are then bioavailable to the plants growing above the ground. So it's a symbiotic or mutually beneficial relationship between life that lives within the soil and life that grows above the soil. So in a healthy pasture such as this one, this is what we might ideally want to see happening below the surface. Here you can see healthy grass that has been allowed to recover for some time after it has been grazed, enabling the roots time to grow deep into the soil that has not been compacted by overuse. And what I'd like you to notice is that these roots form pathways for rainwater to infiltrate into. At the same time, soil aggregates formed of tiny rock and mineral fragments create tiny spaces in the soil itself through which microbes travel by swimming along films of moisture, eating and breaking down organic matter more efficiently. If you look between the plant roots, you can see these spaces giving it a chocolate cake-like appearance. The soil is literally a sponge that can absorb great amounts of water during a spring thaw or throughout a rainy season, and then hold it further into the dry season. And by the way, this kind of soil also infiltrates and breaks down leachate and pathogens from our horse's manure, rather than letting it run off the land into the nearest stream or body of water. So now in this slide, we can see what would appear to be, or appear to a lot of us, as a typical field being used to allow horses out onto pasture. Although we may be well-meaning in providing them this free space, their constant grazing and trampling of the same ground over and over is literally death to both the forage and the living organisms in the soil. So not only will this uncovered ground be too hot during the day to maintain a moderate temperature during summer months, but the ground has become compacted and no longer capable of infiltrating rainwater to mitigate flooding, nor then capable of holding water to mitigate drought. And this is what the overgrazed pasture would look like beneath the surface. You can see that the compacted soil provides no space for living organisms, so the grass roots are short and unable to provide nutrient-dense forage for the animals to eat. It's also much harder on horses with sugar intolerance to constantly be regrazing the lower half of the plant, which contains most of the sugar. The top half is where the better fiber content is, such as in this next slide. So how do we build better soil into our pastures? Well, here again at Alayne's farm, you can see that she is containing her horses in one section using temporary fencing. When they have eaten that section, they are then moved off to another, giving the previous section time to rest and recover. In the wild, where there is no fencing, it's the predators such as wolves and lions that cause grazing herds to bunch up for safety, graze an area intensively, and then move off that area and not return for quite some time, allowing the microorganisms, insects, and bugs time to break down the manure from the animals and turn it into that bioavailable food for the plants for regrowth. And this is actually how grasses evolved with large herds of grazing animals over millennia. We could see it in the plains areas of the United States with the bison, or in Africa with the great herds of wild animals. And this is actually what builds healthy soil that is nutrient dense and has good structure for rainwater infiltration. And so using temporary fence, as you see here, instead of predators, is one way of mimicking nature in a domestic setting. So now, as I mentioned in the beginning, I've condensed this information into a simplified presentation, but I will be sending you all resource sheets. with information for you to dive into for those of you who'd like to look deeper into ways of implementing this idea at your own property or facility. And of course, please put any questions into the Q&A while they're on your mind. But for the sake of time, I'm going to just proceed with the second half of my presentation, but I promise I will circle back and get to your questions. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about swales. Alayne mentioned some of these already in her presentation, so I'll just go into a little more detail. But swales are an effective low-tech, low or no-cost strategy for storing water to prevent flooding and drought. A swale is a simple ditch or trench dug on contour, which means that it's dug horizontally or level to the ground, rather than, say, running perpendicular up and down a slope. A swale can be anywhere from a few inches to a few feet deep, and its purpose is to capture rainwater, and in so doing, slow or pause the speed at which that water would otherwise run off the land. Instead, it will sink into the ground where it is naturally filtered, preventing erosion and flooding and thereby the silting of streams and waterways. It will also water surrounding vegetation longer into the dry season and recharge groundwater. And so now, for those of you who aren't especially familiar with the concept of swales, I'll show you a few more examples of some of the ways they can be used. The left-hand photo shows a swale being used as a plant bed to catch runoff from an impervious surface, in this case, a parking lot. Alayne had one of these similar in her presentation as well. The right-hand photo shows a rock path with a swale dug underneath to catch water that will supply moisture to the plant beds on either side. So you wouldn't even know there's a swale underneath when walking on it. And here's another example, a pathway that was dug out and then filled with wood chips in order to provide moisture to the plant beds on either side. Woody material is great to fill a swale because when it rains, the wood swells up with that moisture. And then as it dries, it shrinks as it releases water back into the soil, keeping it hydrated longer into the year and reducing the need for supplemental watering. And here's a swale that's being used as a rain garden. It's used to capture water. You can see it's in the low spot in that field there. And then here are a series of swales filled with wood chips that I dug alongside 3 hedgerows in a side pasture that we use for an orchard and native edibles. It might be a little hard to tell in this photo, but the land slopes downward from the left side of the picture to the right. And when it rains, the swales catch the water and sink it farther into the soil where the trees and shrubs can make use of it. This then also prevents more runoff downslope. And then this is me, shovel in hand in my best farm clothes and my helper cat. And I should mention here that I was not in the habit of digging ditches. So when I began this project, I did just a little bit at a time over several weeks to give myself a chance to get over being intimidated by the idea, going at my own pace and working in short segment as time allowed. But the beauty of digging a swale is that it's very low tech, but highly effective. It was something I could do by myself using simple concepts. It cost me $0 and I found all needed materials on site. The only primary tool I used was a shovel, but I occasionally used a level and then briefly a wire cutter and pipe tape shown in the photo on the right. I got away with beginning this project before the rains when the ground was quite hard because our soil is very sandy. And so I was able to slice it out in small dry chunks. But the type of soil that each of you have might determine what times of year you'd want to be doing something similar. And as I spoke to before, the swales I've installed are part of a broader holistic grazing management plan that I coordinate with 3 other neighbors who have adjoining small farms. At the same time, if you are living in a more urban or suburban area or have a horse facility without pasture, installing a swale can be highly effective on its own. So my particular project was to capture and redirect all the water that runs off the side of our main barn roof during the rains in order to aid my broader efforts to stop water from running off the property in general. That section of roof is about 960 square feet, which means this roof sheds about 576 gallons of water with every inch of rainfall. So in a normal year of rain in my area, just this one section of roof can generate about 14,000 gallons of water per year. And I know that Alayne showed a slide with this formula for calculating those figures, but I'll also be sending you information on that. And I can type a link for you into the Q&A for those of you who want to look that up during this webinar. So my plan was to continue to direct the water flowing off the roof into the downspout that you see in the right-hand photo. But that meant redirecting where that downspout took the water, which was currently running through underground pipes out to the driveway where it had been directed for the past 42 years. You can see the dark corrugated pipe at the bottom of the left-hand photo where water from the roof would gush out during the rains. And I'm including the second photo on the right, taken later at a different time of the year, because I was hoping to better show the significant downslope of this property that runs directly to the road and how easily water could be carried off site. Now, the grass will slow some of the flow from the drain pipe, but before our soil became more porous with improved management, that grass was not enough to keep all that concentrated flow of water from sheeting over the surface and down into the street where it joined other runoff from neighboring properties and then picked up silt and toxins off the road before finding its way into the nearest creek, which for us is just down the street. So directly in front of the barn, you can see that there's a bed of dried out nasturtiums that died from lack of water. And so I decided to dig my swale here. One, because it was a convenient place to redirect the downspout coming off the barn roof. And two, because the water I captured there would water that nasturtium bed for me. I should mention that before digging, it's important to know where your existing underground pipelines are. And because I don't own this property, for me, that meant involving the owner in those discussions and checking maps of water and gas lines. The second slide to the right shows the initial dig. I laid out tarps to make it easier to keep the soil in a neat pile and easier to clean up afterwards. I then disconnected the downspout from the old pipe that ran out to the driveway and attached a new length of corrugated pipe that I could direct into the swale, attaching the two using pipe wrap tape. And incidentally, I found this leftover corrugated pipe that had been lying out behind the barn for 20 years. I also used a level to make sure that the bottom surface of the swale was level so that when the water flowed into it, it would lie evenly throughout the entire length and not run out one side. And then at the end of the corrugated pipe, I found and attached a length of drain pipe with holes. You can see an example of that in the top right-hand photo to help evenly distribute the flow of water into the swale. This isn't really necessary, but since we also happen to have a small length of it lying around, I went ahead and made use of it. I wrapped that pipe with a fine mesh cloth to keep debris and soil particles from working their way into the holes and clogging it up, as you can see in the lower right photo. And here's a side view of that completed portion of the project where you can see how everything fits together from the downspout into the swale. Now, some of you might be questioning why water is being collected right alongside a building structure. So I'm going back to this angle. There were actually several things that I did to prevent water damage and seepage inside the barn. First, you might have already noticed that this is a small swale that is not anywhere large enough to hold all of the water that comes off this roof during a rainstorm. So I dug a secondary or overflow swale that I'll show you in a moment. But this was one of the ways that I prevented too much water building up around the barn itself. And secondly, you can see that the foundation of the barn to the right of the swale is set above ground. If you can see my cursor, it's just right here. This foundation is actually set above the ground where the barn rests on. And that swale, while not deep, is dug below the foundation, once again preventing water from pooling up against the siding. And then finally, as I mentioned before, I was working with sandy soil that drains relatively rapidly, so I could feel confident that there would be no standing water, even at the bottom of the swale. Whereas if you're dealing with clay or adobe soil that holds a lot of moisture and tends to pool up, having a swale that close to a building is probably not the best choice for you. And in that case would mean redirecting the downslope farther away. So then I filled the swale in with woody material that we had on hand from tree trimmings that we had chipped into a pile. But if I hear the sound of a chipper when the county prunes back trees and shrubs in the neighborhood, I've been known to run down the street and talk to the work crew because many times they're happy to have a place to dump their loads. So if you happen to live in an area where this kind of thing takes place, it can be useful to get to know your local crews. But if you don't have wood chips on hand, you can use any type of woody plant trimmings to fill a swale. You can see that in the left-hand photo, I topped those wood chips off with finer clippings from my own hand prunings. And I should mention that it's important to really pack that material in by walking back and forth on top of it to ensure that the sides of the swale don't collapse or erode. So after filling the swale with woody material, I covered it with several inches of the same soil I had dug out of the swale, and I topped that off with a layer of compost that I then reseeded. And on the right, you can see what that dried out bed of nasturtium looked like the following spring. So as I mentioned, the first swale alongside the barn was not large enough to hold all of the rainwater flowing off the roof. So I dug a secondary overflow swale downslope. And here you can see that swale next to the garden bed that it will be feeding. The soil happened to be very rocky, so I ended up sifting out the rocks and placing them at the bottom of the swale, which would aid in filtration, and then make the remaining rock free soil, better suited for topping and reseeding, as you'll see in a moment. So now the first slide to the left shows the connecting channel from the smaller swale to the larger one. And the second slide shows the formula that I roughly followed to make sure that the overflow from the first swale would run seamlessly through that channel and into the second swale. The picture on the right is showing that the first swale is level, and before the water fills up to the top, it will flow down a 4-inch drop indicated at the bottom. It's important to make the drop into any subsequent channel at least 4 inches to ensure that water does not backflow over the sides of the initial swale. Now, obviously, the connecting channel on the left needs to be at a downslope from the top swale in order for the water to flow into the overflow swale. I was not exact about the degree of slope in the connecting channel, and for a project like this, you don't really need to be, but it's ideal to have a gradual slope that keeps the water flowing but not gushing. And I used the level you see lying in the middle of the connector channel just to make sure that I was digging in a continuous downslope. And here is the connector channel and second swale filled with wood chips as well. And then what it looked like after the swales had been packed and several inches of soil had been placed on top of the chips and then seeded. And then here's just another shot from the front. You can see the barn on the left and the swale at the base and the overflow swale to the farther right, the upside of the garden bed to the right. So in conclusion, as I mentioned, in the beginning, the purpose of this project was to augment what the land itself was already becoming capable of doing because of implementing better grazing practices over the previous several years. And last year was the first rainy season that our land had been able to infiltrate all of the rainwater that fell onto the property, which meant that no runoff for the first time since the current owners purchased the land over 40 years ago. And this is just a visual to show that, you know, kind of, well, here, wait a minute, sorry. Let's see. We on our property were able to sink, after more than 20 inches of rain, well over 3 million gallons of rainwater on our 6 acres, which is the equivalent of about 1,600 2,000-gallon water cisterns. And then this photo just gives you an idea of how many that is. This was a great relief to us after watching some of our neighbors truck in water because their wells had gone dry. And then this photo just gives you an idea of how dry our property looks like in late summer, early fall. My town of Petaluma is a high-risk fire area, while parts of it are also a flood zone. So the point that I really wanted to stress is that even in populated deserts or dry places, more rainwater falls than we actually use. And yet everywhere we are depleting our rivers and lakes and underground aquifers that supply us with fresh water. Or we are experiencing more flooding because we have managed our lands in such a way as to limit its capacity to infiltrate adequate rainwater. So I'm hoping that this leaves you all with some good food for thought. And with that, I'll conclude the share, and I'll maybe ask Kirsten to field some questions.
There were a couple that came in a little bit delayed, I believe, for Alayne.
Okay.
I don't know if you want me to read those now.
Sure. Yeah.
Marcy was asking how often to harrow.
Oh.
Oh, you're muted, Alayne.
Sorry, thanks. In pastures, what you want to do, gosh, I feel fine, but now my voice is really getting craggy. You want to graze and graze down about 3 to 4 inches. And then when you move them on, that's when you would want to harrow.
Great, thank you.
So when you take them off of the pasture, then you would harrow it, and that's to break up the manure that's there. And then you let it rest and regrow.
Okay, thanks. And then from Rachel, I would love any resources for similar protocols for water management and footing in a chicken yard. I'm needing to work with a concrete area that's part of my chicken yard, and I'm considering gravel or other overlay. Thank you.
Well, Harriet, you've got chickens. You want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. So there might be a couple of things you could do. Gravel is one option. If the cement area isn't covering the entire space where your chickens have access to, you could actually dig some swales around the edges of that concrete area so that the runoff from the water would flow into that and not muddy the rest of your the area that you had access to for the chickens. We have gravel in part of our chicken paddock. We also have area that they can go out onto pasture. And so I'm mentioning that just because our gravel is probably more like 5/8 inch, and maybe it might be more comfortable on the chicken's feet if it were smaller. Those are just my initial thoughts.
Thank you. That seems to be it for the questions for now.
Okay, terrific. And people are welcome to just keep putting questions in. Oh, sorry.
A few more just popped in.
Okay.
From Rick P. For rainwater swales, how far a distance from the swale is ideal to plant plants like the one described?
Well, you can actually fill the swale and plant directly on top of it. Depending on your soil, sometimes you might, if you have more clay or adobe soil, you might want to plant actually above the swale, especially if you have trees and shrubs that don't like getting their feet wet. But if you're planting things that can tolerate more water or need more water, then you would plant, you could plant directly next to the swale on the downside of the swale. That's the case that I did in my example in our side pasture, because those trees and shrubs need the water, and we have really sandy soil and the water drains very quickly. And so I wanted to give those plants as good a chance as I could of getting in the most water that I could.
Okay, and the second part of his question is for swales on a hillside. Are there any rules of thumb to distance/swale for a given slope, like 10% slope, 20% slope, etc.?
That's it. Again, depend on your soil and the types of plants you're planting. So again, the natives that, especially here in California, that don't like getting their feet wet, you might want to plant the larger plants above that swale. And then the steeper the slope, you might consider the actual width of your swale. So if you're actually digging a swale into a slope itself, you're going to likely be cutting into the back side of the hill. And so planting things, maybe smaller shrubs downslope from that, will help with erosion and help that swale from collapsing downslope. I hope that all made sense.
Thank you. And can you take a question from someone that has their hand raised, or do they need to type it into the Q&A?
Sure, I think so.
Jana M.
Okay. Oh, Jana.
Maybe her hand just went down.
Okay, no, I just put it down. So I will try to pull her up. Okay, so Jana, I've allowed you to talk. And if you want to unmute yourself.
Good morning. I just wanted to thank everyone for a fantastic presentation. And I was wondering if you had a recommendation for regional plant lists as to where people can find a good example of some of the plants that might be well suited for this task.
That's a great question. Thanks, Jana. Yeah, so in my resource sheet that I'll be sending out to everyone, I do have links to all kinds of places that you can access regardless of where you live in the country. So yeah, I'll be sending that out.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. That seems to be all the questions for now.
All right. Okay, well, great, Alayne. So I guess we're going to take a 5-minute break right now. And so I will stop the recording for a bit, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes for the rest of Alayne's presentation.
Okay, I will try to squeak and cough my way through this. I actually feel a lot better than I did yesterday and the day before. So now I'm just at the point where I sound bad. I really apologize for that, but at least we're not in person and I'm spreading germs. So composting is one of my favorite things to talk about, and it's just such an awesome technique, and it goes right along with what Terry was talking about conserving water, because compost is fine organic material and it's going to hold moisture. And in this time of climate change and warming and droughts and extreme weather events, we really need to have that soil sponge so that our pastures can survive through the droughty seasons and or the droughty time of the year. So that's why one of the big reasons why compost is so important on horse properties. So in these two pictures here, they're two different places, but they still illustrate the same ideas. The top picture is a place with no manure management program. This was actually a place that I boarded at when some of my horses were in training for reining. And the manure pile was basically inaccessible. If you clean stalls, you had to tiptoe the manure cart on a bunch of boards that zigzag through, like a slimy, disgusting area, and then dump into that manure pile. And you couldn't access it if you wanted it to haul it away, because it was all wet in there in the wintertime. And it's Western Washington, where there are lots of trees. So it gives you, the picture gives you the feeling that it's isolated, but there were 5-acre parcels. So the neighbors were really quite close by, and everybody's on groundwater. So there were a lot of environmental as well as chore efficiency issues at stake there. Oops, sorry. Whereas in the bottom picture, they've got a 3-bin composting system. It's creative in that it's in the middle of their confinement area. So that makes it chore efficient. And then it's very easy to dump the contents of a finished compost bin into a manure spreader, and then go into the pasture, which surrounds the confinement area, and spread compost. So super chore efficient. It's easy in, easy out, easy to access. And it's going to good use instead of a bad use. So how much manure does a horse produce in one day? It's about 50 pounds. Those aren't my numbers. That's USDA. And how about one horse for 1 year? It's a lot, right? And, we have, like a dozen horses here at our property. So if you do the math at our property, it's like 220 tons of manure a year. And I don't know if we even see this anymore, but back in the day, when I first started with the conservation district in Puget Sound, you'd see these kinds of things everywhere. And this mismanaged manure pile, it's more than just an eyesore for the owners and the neighbors. It's causing flies and odors. There's runoff that's going to get into the surface water, as well as potentially into the groundwater, the drinking water for people in the aquifer. And there's so much better use that you could be doing with all of that. It could be compost, and you could be utilizing it in some ways. It could be going into, you could be using that space for pastures or paddocks or arena or parking or gardens, or so many better uses than this. And we saw the picture of our place when we first moved on it, and the previous owners had not been picking up manure. So manure holds moisture. It's, as I said, it's fine organic material, and it acts like a sponge. So 50 pounds of manure a day is 50 pounds of mud at least during the day, in a day. And if you go weeks and months and years without picking up the manure, you got a real mess. And I might mention diseases, flies, and insects. This is a great place for pathogens. So the other thing that happens when you don't have a manure management plan is that horses get reinfested and reinfected with parasites. So the way the cycle works for parasites is the adult worm is inside of the horse, and they shed eggs, and the eggs pass out in the manure. And once outside, it depends on the species of parasite, but some species hatch as frequently as every 1 to 3 days. And what emerges is a microscopic larva that crawls across the ground, and it's hardwired to look for something tall to climb up. It climbs up that, and then your horse eats that blade of grass, and the cycle is repeated. So what would be particularly detrimental what would propagate parasite reinfestation more is if you have an overgrazed pasture and lots of manure and in a wet climate. The wet dampness facilitates that the larva can travel better. Mismanaged manure piles, all this leachate running off of this manure pile. This is a highly urban area where I took this picture. And actually that leachate is what you want. That's, you want it in your compost. You don't want it running off and getting into surface and subsurface groundwater. And if it does, it's going to cause a lot of problems. And in many places, this is regulated. And you could get fined and in trouble for that. So instead, what we want to do is create a natural cycle, we want to create a holistic approach that's going to benefit the plants and the animals, or the plants and the soils on your property. And by putting the compost back into the system, you're going to create a healthier pasture. And the healthier pasture then in turn works for you by filtering out and utilizing nutrients and sediments from manure and urine. And one horse produces about $500 of compost a year. So if you're not composting and not utilizing it, you're throwing money away. So creating a natural cycle is going to save you money. It's going to make your horse healthier and happier because they have better pasture to enjoy. It's going to reduce flies and odors because you can imagine those other pictures. There's going to be lots of odors and insects. And it creates a nicer place for you to enjoy. And it's all a part of climate resiliency and dealing with these extreme weather situations. The healthier your pasture is, the better able your property is going to be at absorbing water during these storm events and helping to prevent flooding and to recharge your groundwater. And I think I said this earlier, but it's worth repeating. We know with all these big storm events that it has done something to recharge the reservoirs, but we really have no idea what it's done for the aquifers, because it could have potentially run off all too quickly. That snow that's still there in the mountain might be helpful for that, recharging the groundwater. But what does recharge the groundwater is a good stand of grass. And Terry was showing how water travels along the roots and in the tiny pores that the worms and insects make into your soil. That's all a part of keeping your pastures so that they're drought tolerant and able to go longer into the summer. And it's all a part of recharging your groundwater. Okay, so the manure management techniques that I'm going to talk about are, I'm going to concentrate on composting, but I'm also going to talk about some offsite options. And this would be for people who have maybe more horses than they have land, and they don't have a way to utilize all the compost, so they have a high stocking rate, we call that. Or maybe composting just doesn't sound like fun to you. And then I'll also talk about chore efficiency, because that's all a part of manure management as well. Okay. So it doesn't matter what manure management technique you have in your place. We all have to start out with two really important points. And those are picking up the manure on a regular basis and covering your manure compost piles during the rainy season. So if you don't pick up the manure and get it into your manure management program, it's not going to do any good. And covering your manure piles, your manure storage facilities, what that does is it keeps those important nutrients that you want to save for your compost. It keeps them in the compost, and so that they don't run off and cause an environmental issue. Okay, so let's start out by talking about compost. So, and composting. So this picture in the upper left corner here is a 2-bin composting system. So what she does at her place, and she had like 20 horses, she would stockpile the manure and stall waste in one bin until that bin got full, and then she would allow that to compost. And hopefully then the other bin was either ready to spread or it was empty. And then once this bin is full, then she would start stockpiling there. And that was their manure spreader. These are their pastures. And they had an asphalt pad and cement sides for that. I'm going to show you lots of different designs for compost bins. But this is some finished compost, and that's talking about the temperature. You want to get your compost up to about 130 degrees for at least 3 days to kill parasites, pathogens, and weed seeds. So let's look at this a little bit more. The advantages to composting for us as horse owners are many. Some of them that I like to emphasize is that the composting process is the heat generated is going to kill worm eggs, parasites, pathogens, and weed seeds. It's going to help reduce that parasite reinfestation cycle, reduces flies, odors, the volume of stall waste that you have by about 50%. Is, if you start out with a pile that's like 6 feet tall, once you're done composting, it's only going to be about 3 feet. So you have less material that you have to deal with. And then it provides you with a free, easy, very valuable soil amendment to apply to your pastures. Let's see, there was one thing there that I wanted to go back and reiterate, but maybe I'll think of it as we go along. Okay, so the advantages to our natural resources or to the ecosystem is that using compost improves the health of our soils and our pastures and our gardens or lawns or wherever we apply it. So the composting process, actually, we call it fixing the nitrogen. When you spread fresh manure on pastures, the nitrogen hasn't been fixed. And in order for the plants to utilize it, it has to get fixed. And that takes a little bit of time. So the composting process fixes the nitrogen and sort of speeds it up. And once it's fixed, then the plants can utilize that nitrogen. And the other cool thing about fixed nitrogen is that it's not very water soluble. So the nitrogen in manure, straight manure, can easily get washed out of a pasture, whereas the fixed nitrogen can is not going to get washed out as easily in a storm event. So compost also has micro and macronutrients. It's more like a multivitamin. Whereas if you buy fertilizer, it's going to only have usually nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. And compost is going to have a whole wide variety of nutrients, but there are going to be some small ones and some important ones, but very small ones. And then also microbial life. It's got beneficial bacteria and fungal organisms, and those are so important to soil health. And those are so much what are being destroyed in commercial agriculture because they're rototilling and rototilling and rototilling, and they're applying chemicals that kill beneficial bacteria and fungal organisms. And the fungal organisms in particular provide that pathway for getting nutrients and moisture down into the soil, like which Terry was showing you. Compost acts as a time-released, slow-acting fertilizer. So it's not like adding NPK. It's like adding something that's going to slowly add nutrients over a year, 5 years, even 15 years. So it's very beneficial, but over a long time. And then, as I mentioned, it helps with soil moisture, and then it makes our plants. I mean, research is showing us all these things. This is not just me saying it. There's science and academic research behind all of this, that it shows that plants are healthier, more disease resistant, vegetables and fruit are tastier and brighter colored. So how to compost? Compost needs water and air. So you want it to be about as damp as a wrung out sponge. So where we live, it gets super hot in the summertime. So we, more than tarping in the wintertime, we tarp in the summertime to keep it from getting too dried out. And when we can, we have put it under a roof to help keep the sun off of it. So the squeeze test is something that you can use to figure out if your compost is damp enough. So you want your compost to feel like a sponge in your kitchen, a wrung out sponge. So you wring the sponge out and there's not water dripping out of it, but it's not completely dry either. So you can do it by just grabbing a handful and squeezing it. And if you got a bunch of water that runs out the side of your hand, then it's too wet. But if you squeeze it and it just all falls apart, it's too dry. The tarp or the cover is moisture control. Sometimes people want to tell you that it's to hold the heat in, but if you've ever gone camping, as I did when I was a kid, and I forgot my sleeping bag, and my friend's parents gave me the ground cloth, which is essentially a tarp, and I slept in that for the night. Well, I woke up at like 2 in the morning and I was freezing cold and soaking wet because it traps in all of your moisture, the sweat while you're sleeping. And so it does nothing for heat, but it's very good at holding moisture in. So you want to use a tarp if you live in a rainy place. Use a tarp in the wintertime. Or if you live in a super hot, dry place, you might consider using a tarp in the summertime. So you also want to keep your compost aerobic, which means with air. Anaerobic composting is the stinky process, and we don't want it to get anaerobic. We want it to have air, and those are the right kind of bacteria that we want in our compost system. So you can use a tractor to turn it occasionally to put air in it, or you can do passive aeration, like in this picture where we have PVC pipes inserted into the middle of the compost, like chimneys. So air is going to permeate in about a foot. So it's really the center of the pile where you need the PVC pipes to go in so that it gets air into that part of the compost pile. So if you're managing the air and the water correctly, it's going to get hot. It's going to happen. And what you want is about 130 degrees for 3 days to kill parasites, pathogens, and weed seeds. And it happens super easily. A lot of times too, you can see in this, maybe you can see in this picture that there's some white there. A lot of times people say, oh, my compost caught on fire. And if you ask them why, they say because there's this white, they think it's ash in the compost, but actually what it is actinomycetes, which are a type of bacteria that are an important part of the composting process. And they're telling you that it's working and you're doing all the right things. So when you see actinomycetes, that should make you happy and you'll know that you're on the right path. So once the compost heats up, temperature is going to drop back down again. When all the available food source and nitrogen has been used up, then the profile of insects and bacteria and fungal organisms starts to change. And once it drops below 90 degrees, you start getting larger organisms coming in, and you get these cute guys coming in. and they break it down some more. Red worms are also called red wigglers, and they're the ones that you use for fishing. And some people buy these and put them into their compost to make it healthier. So finished compost is going to look dark in color, like you see here, or in our compost here in the bottom right-hand side. It should look evenly textured, a little bit more evenly textured, and crumbly like soil. It should be 90 degrees or less, and it should take about 3 to 6 months. It's going to be dependent on how well you manage the air and the water, as to how quickly it composts. And you definitely don't want it to get completely dried out, because then it becomes hydrophobic and it repels moisture. I'm sure you've all seen the manure balls that you can kick around like a hockey puck, and they're completely hydrophobic. And if you tried to put them in water, they'd float because they won't absorb water anymore. So where to put your compost piles? Let's look at examples of how to lay out your property. And I'm going to show you some examples of different kinds of bins, but this would be a good point to mention that you don't have to have bins. You could have piles, and bins just maybe make it more aesthetic or easier to manage. So it's your choice. So you want to lay out your property so that it's completely chore efficient. So that means that you want to make it easy to get the stall waste and manure and yard clippings, if you're doing that, into your compost bins. And then once it's finished composting, you want to make sure that it's convenient to access that finished compost and get it to your pastures or give it away, whatever you want to do with it. So locating it, it's one of those things, again, you want to make sure that you have it chore efficiently located. Usually we say 100 feet from all boundaries and from like the high water mark of creeks, ponds, wetlands, and 100 feet from your well. But you also want it in a high, well-drained area. You don't want it at the bottom of a soup bowl where it's going to collect water and turn into mush. Okay, so compost bins can be built from a variety of materials. Talk to your RCD or your conservation district, and they're going to have ideas for you as far as designs. I'll show you our compost bins in a few minutes. We use the NRCS design. So the NRCS is the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the RCDs and CDs can access their materials and guidance and plans and share those. Here's a few ideas of wood bins that people built. The one on the bottom left-hand side, they spaced the walls out a little bit to provide a little bit more passive aeration. The one on the bottom right, they dug that into the side of the hill so that it'd be chore efficient. She could easily clean her stalls, pens, and round pen, and then just come and use gravity to dump down into her compost bins. So there's many different designs that I've seen over the years for cement types of bins. Ecology blocks, those 3 bin designs, ecology blocks, those are available everywhere, and they're usually pretty inexpensive. What they are is the remnants of cement that when a cement truck does a job, when they come back, they pour what's left over into a form that creates these ecology blocks. And then the gravel company or the cement company sells the ecology blocks. So they're usually pretty inexpensive, like $100, $125, but they weigh like 2 tons or more. So you have to have specialized equipment to deliver it and to set them into place. But the one on the lower right, that's a NRCS design, and your RCD or your CD can give you design for that. Okay, so let's look at what we did at our place. Is Google Earth of our place. And initially we composted just in a pile in our hay barn under the roof. But eventually we needed the hay barn for hay storage. And I knew we wanted to build a more dedicated system. So what we decided to do is put the compost bins literally right in the middle of the property. So our property border is here. Oops, right about here. And this way we can pick up the manure in all of the property, every place, and get it into the compost bins. There's water here, so we can keep it damp, and it's easy to access the tractor, lots of room for the tractor to back up. And then the finished compost can go out in the pasture here, or we have a driveway farm road, and it's easy for, if we're going to give it away or sell it, it's easy for people to come in and get it that way. As I said, we had a NRCS design for our place, which is just a standard design that, and anybody can get that design. Compost guidelines. You want to apply the finished compost to pastures, lawns, gardens, only during the growing season. You just physically don't want your compost to get washed away during a storm event. And you want to apply it when your plants and the soil can utilize it. You want to basically just want to apply in a thin layer, no more than like 1/4 of an inch at a time, and the party line is no more than 2 to 3 inches per year. So here's some examples besides pasture. The last one was pasture. So here's gardens that you can apply compost to. These gardens have had a lot of compost applied to them. And then we apply compost to our lawn almost every year. We do that. And then it helps so that we don't have to use as much irrigation. Here's another example of what we did with compost. And this actually was just straight stall waste. And it was from when we moved in, the previous landowners, it was probably like 3 years worth of manure. And they had it piled all the way at the far end in the corner of the property. You know, it's like it's like out of sight, out of mind. So they also, a lot of the property, they didn't have plants on it. They had used soil sterilants. So we knew we wanted grass for a number of reasons, you know, but primarily for environmental reasons, that we wanted to have grass. It's cooler. Grass helps with sequestering carbon. It helps with climate change, and it helps recharge the groundwater. So we took the pile of stall waste and we spread it out by hand. We planted a few trees, and then we literally just planted grass by hand. And this is the round pen here, and that's the grass. I mean, it looked like it came in so well, it looked like we had hydroseeded it. And then we spread compost in our pastures as well. A little bit about manure spreaders. They basically come in 2 flavors. There's ground-driven manure spreaders or PTO-driven manure spreaders, and they can both range in sizes from small to big. So PTO stands for power takeoff. And that means that you have this right here that hooks up to the tractor. And that PTO is what powers the drive that kicks the compost out of the back and spreads it out, flings it out over the pasture. These are all ground driven. Well, it's just 2 of them, ground driven manure spreaders. Here's a smaller version. This manure spreader can be pulled by like a gator or a three-wheeler. And so ground driven means that the wheels actually engage the belt that kicks the compost out. So we sold this manure spreader. We bought it. I might mention we bought it, oh man, years ago, and we brought it with us to Washington on a flatbed because it's hard to find small manure spreaders, but we bought it for $125 and we had to fix it. It took us about 2 years, and then we probably had it for 20 years. And then I sold it for, I think I sold it for $1,500. And then we bought this, which cost a lot more, but it's a ground driven manure spreader. And the cool thing about it is that we can hook it up to our old Ford Explorer, which is a workhorse. And we can pull it with that and spread with that. So here's Matt loading into the manure spreader, and then we can just pull with the Ford Explorer. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. So what I guess I should mention here is what was hard here was every time it'd take a lot longer to spread compost because we'd have to hook and unhook. So you go out and spread one load, then you come back and you have to unhook everything and then load with the tractor. So it's really, if you have a PTO manure spreader, you almost need two tractors. Whereas if you have ground driven, you can pull with another 4-wheel drive vehicle and then load with your tractor. So hopefully that makes more sense for you. But maybe you might have a neighbor that you can share equipment with or who could help out. Here's the PTO manure spreader, and the neighbor came over with his one year and he pulled the manure spreader and then Matt just loaded it with our tractor. So that went a lot faster. Compost, many uses for compost, as I was mentioning, that compost is highly absorbent and it actually makes great bedding in stalls. So this gal takes her finished compost and she sprinkles it on top of a layer of bedding, and it's a recommended practice. And there's actually YouTube videos out there about using compost as bedding. Okay, so too much manure on your property, or maybe composting doesn't sound like fun. What are some options? So I always like to tell this story. I've been to shows in Las Vegas, a lot of the regional shows and the big shows these days, like Run for a Million and some of the big reining and cutting shows and AQHA shows. They're all at South Point Casino in Las Vegas. And that facility can hold like 1,200 horses. So do the math and figure out how much stall waste that is per day. So when I was there, of course, I was super interested to find out what they were doing with all these big bins of stall waste. And it turns out they have a sister project where they compost. And in a place like Vegas, it would be really beneficial to apply compost to any growing operations that you have to help conserve moisture. So let's talk about offsite options for stall waste. The first would be a giveaway approach. So it's always going to be easier to rehome compost than it is straight manure and stall waste. Compost is a lot more attractive than manure and stall waste. If you want to just give it away or even sell it, you might consider a sign. But remember that you're going to probably get a lot of people stopping, so you want to be prepared for that. A sign's going to be more useful if you're on a busy road. So these are things to think about. And then there's other ways to advertise it, like Craigslist or through extension, or maybe through your RCD, your conservation district, or there's things like tilth organizations, master gardeners, gardening clubs, arboretums. Some years we have more than we can apply at the time of the year when we're ready to apply it and when we need our bins available. So probably the last 4 years, we've had some that we've wanted to sell, or give away. So I put it on Nextdoor on Marketplace on Facebook. And I have a great story about this because the first 2 years I put it up there. I thought everything was cool. I had great pictures. And I kept getting kicked off by Facebook, and they kept saying that it was forgot the word, but like illegal activity or something, as if I was doing human trafficking or something. And I kept emailing and asking and trying to read, and I couldn't figure out, what I was doing that was wrong, because there's lots of stuff that's getting sold on Marketplace, and I don't know what the big deal was. So finally, 2 years ago, I changed my wording. I took out the word horses and I took out the words manure. And what I say is excellent quality compost from an equestrian facility. And bingo, it worked. And I have people like knocking down our door to come and get our compost. Of course, we do have a tractor so we can load it, so that makes it a little easier. And I also want to mention that in many places, there's regulations that surround what you can actually call compost. So like Washington State and probably California are two places where they have very strict regulations, and you can't call something compost unless it's met certain criteria. So you may have to dance around that a little bit and maybe call it aged stall waste or something like that. Let me show you a few other creative ideas for offsite manure management. This is in Washington, in Wenatchee, at a place called Appalachie Riders. It's a co-op boarding facility, and they have shows there. And they have, I forgot to write down the number, but I think it's around 200 horses that are there all the time. And then when they have shows coming in, it's around another 200 or more. And it's all self-care. Everybody's required to clean their stalls and paddocks every day, but they have it set up in such a cool, chore efficient way. So it's easy for people to do this. Hang on a second. So they come in, clean stalls. They don't even need a manure cart. They just clean and toss into this cement trough area here. And then every day a big tractor comes through and it scrapes this area out and accumulates it right here. And then what they do is they actually sell that stall waste. Here's like what they've accumulated in one day. They sell it to organic fruit growers in the area. I'm sure they're not like making money, but at least it's not a liability. It's an asset. So other places that might accept stall waste for you in your area that you can look into are compost facilities, plant nurseries, tree farms, crop growers, gardeners, topsoil companies, possibly manure management exchange programs at your RCDs or conservation districts. In California, every jurisdiction, I think, is required to have some kind of composting facility where they can accept manure. So you've got lots of good options for managing manure other than just stockpiling it. So if you are doing an offsite, you might still need to have some specialized equipment. So you want to look into what your options are. These are dumping trailers that have a battery, so they'll automatically dump it. You might need a big tractor, or you might need something like this where you can dump into a cart or a manure spreader. or you might need a receptacle or some kind of storage facility that you'll have to construct or rent. But giving away compost, we've done this too. We save our old feed sacks, and then we fill those up with our finished compost. And then we've given them to people like as gifts, and people are super excited about that because think of how expensive a bag of compost is otherwise. Okay, so my third option for manure management, and this will go pretty quickly, Terry, because I think I'm right at my time limit, is chore efficiency. So there's lots of different ways that you can make yourself more chore efficient, and so that it's easier to clean and get the manure and stall waste out of your stalls and confinement areas. So rubber mats, using less bedding, and I'll talk about that. Alternative beddings and cleaning selectively and having the right equipment. So in this picture, this shows rubber stall mats and just having stall bedding as litter. So that's a thin layer. Basically, you want your bedding to just to absorb urine and moisture. It's if you've got stall mats, they're going to be soft enough so that you don't need bedding or very much bedding. To install stall mats, you want to put in like 3 inches of crushed rock with the minus in it, so that it's, and you want to make sure it's level and compacted. And there's many different types of stall mats. There's the stall mats like in the previous picture. There's interlocking stall mats. This bottom picture is a stall mattress that we saw in California. That's the idea with that, is that you don't maybe have to use as much bedding. Pelleted bedding is basically the gold standard in bedding in most cases because it's kiln dried, it's highly absorbent, so you don't need to use as much. It's less dusty, it's going to compost better than shavings, and it's easy to store because you can just store it outside, maybe throw a tarp over it. And then you want to have, and consider no bedding is another thing to think about. If your horses have access to stalls, maybe they don't need bedding. Horses tend to urinate where it's not going to splash, so they learn not to urinate in the stalls. So the stalls become primarily the area where they eat and where they get in and out of the driving rain and wind. So you want to have the right equipment, and you want to store it in an easy to access location. There's so many kinds of manure forks these days. I'm not a big fan of the metal manure forks, but I like the plastic ones, and the ones with wooden handles are much easier to grip. Here's just a few ideas. Upper left-hand side, this lady was 87 in this picture. She's the one with the ponies in the earlier picture. She uses a garden cart and then dish pans and dog manure equipment. And she just picks up the manure, and she picks it up twice a day, so it's easier for her. And then she can easily dump it into her compost bins where she wants it. And manure cart on the upper right-hand side has a handle, so it's easy to dump it over and pull it back, so you don't have to pinch your fingers in the wheels. Bottom right-hand side, this would work for like one horse or a horse and a pony. This is an Ursa. It's a gardening cart. It's super maneuverable, and then it unhooks and dumps real easily. And then the bottom left-hand side is just a reminder that no matter where we go with our horses these days, we need to pick up manure at trailheads and other places where we go to show or ride, and take it home and put it back into our manure management program at home. Winter issues, for those of you who live in climates where it gets cold and snowy, you still need to pick up manure in the wintertime. as best as you can. And you're going to have some heavy duty equipment to make that happen. And you may want to think about, for any climate there, if you have an option, you might want to get a dumping gator or ranger or razor. Those are all nice to have. But no matter what, you want to pick up the manure and stall waste. You want to pick up just the manure and the urine saturated stall waste. And you want to leave behind the clean bedding, because if you take out all that clean bedding, then it's just going to mean more stall waste that you have to deal with and have to buy. So reducing your bedding use and using chore efficient equipment is going to make your horse life easier, and it's going to lighten the load for stall cleaning. So don't forget to grow something wonderful with all that great compost. And then use your compost to grow healthier pastures, happier horses, and a greener planet as well. And then that's it. And I've listed these resources. Here is the QR code to get to my tip sheets. I've got a whole library of tip sheets that I'm pretty proud of, and they're inexpensive. They're $2 a piece. My Firewise ones are all free. I have like 3 of those, and I really think they're good. A lot of agencies in California have utilized them, and I've asked for permission to reproduce them. So they're good and endorsed by those agencies. So I think that's it. And Terry, do you have questions, or what would we like to do now? I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, okay. That was great, Alayne. Thank you so much. And yep, we do have some questions. Some I started to answer and Sebastian answered, but I'll read them to you anyway. So one of them was, what can you do with manure pile, which is 20 years plus from horse boarding? My parents did it, and now I have to deal with this.
Well, at that point, it'll be great for mulch and for landscaping projects. So I'd use it for that. If you can't utilize it all, maybe you've got some gardening neighbors who might want it. Maybe you can give it away on Nextdoor or Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, places like that. So it can be used. 20 years old, it's pretty benign then. It's probably a lot of the nutrients have washed out of it, but it's probably more like mulch. But it should still be good and useful.
Yeah. Okay, and then Rick asks, can sunlight reduce the temperature required to kill worms or parasites? In other words, using a manure spreader to spread manure in the field without composting it first. And I wanted to get a clarification. I asked him if he was asking if it's okay to spread manure without composting it first, or if he was planning to compost the manure he had already spread. So I wasn't quite sure, but anyways, I'll let you.
I can kind of speak to both of the
Yeah, great.
things. So the recommended practice by veterinarians is not to spread straight manure, because basically what you're doing is spreading worm eggs and pathogens. And sunlight does not kill it. It dries it out so that it's not as an attractive habitat for flies, but it does not kill worm eggs. What kills worm eggs is UV light, and really the only place where in North America where we have enough UV light to break down the cells in the walls of worm eggs is in the Southwest. So the composting process is what you need to kill worm eggs, parasites, and pathogens. So hopefully that answers his questions.
Okay, well, he can type in another one if he's got a follow-up. And then how do you keep raccoons out of the manure pile? She's in a suburb, or he is in a suburban area. Sebastian answered, you might consider composting food scraps in a closable compost bin until the food is broken down enough that it's not attractive to animals before adding it to a larger compost pile. Actually, we do that here on this farm. You would likely want to add leaves or shavings to the bin to help absorb water and excess nitrogen in the food scraps and to help them break down more effectively. Another option is pre-fermenting the food scraps using a bokashi system, a Japanese technique of anaerobically breaking down food scraps before composting them or burying them in the soil. Those are both good options for food scraps if nuisance animals are a concern. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's perfect. That's all well said.
Okay. And then regarding equipment, Veronique asks, regarding equipment, what average horse paper would you recommend for a tractor?
Average horse what?
Horse paper. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure what that word means, but
Yeah.
it just
horsepower.
Oh, horsepower. Okay. Thank you,
horsepower.
Kirsten. Okay. What average horsepower would you recommend for a tractor? That's makes a lot more sense.
I would say it depends. It's kind of like the piece of string answer, how long
Mhm.
is a piece of string? It depends on how many horses, what you plan to do with the tractor, what you're going to pull with it. These days, there's really small tractors out there that are super cool and really useful. Ours is a pretty small one, and gosh, we've had it for over 30 years, and it's very useful. So you don't need a big one. It doesn't have to be big, but you probably want a bucket. I mean, you for sure want a bucket on it, and you want to be able to. You don't necessarily need a PTO, but you want to be able to. You might need a 3-point hitch for harrows and drags and things like that. So I would just talk to the dealers. They got tons of information, and they'll help you with that.
Yeah, that's great. Also, for anybody that's interested, they are coming out now with some great electric tractors. One that's been designed and manufactured right up here in this area. So
Cool. I did not
just
know
to
that.
put
Yeah.
that out there for people if they're interested in looking into that. And then Jan asks a couple of questions. What do you think of manure compost as arena footing?
Yeah, I would not recommend that because compost is pretty fine and it's going to get dusty. And then during the rainy season, it's just going to turn into mud. So that's not a recommended practice or a good use for compost.
Mhm.
Terry, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was just going to
As a
say,
dressage instructor.
yeah, I trained out of a facility that used compost in their footing, but that was a covered arena. But they actually managed that very well because they understood soils and they mixed it with other amendments, and it was actually quite nice.
Gotcha.
But it was covered, so they could
Yeah.
manage exactly how much water they put on it. Is there a problem for food crops if residue from vaccines and wormer chemicals is in the compost?
Yeah, that's a great question because what it infers or what it leads to is that actually the best place for manure from horses that have been dewormed or have been sick and have had medication, the best place for your compost is in the compost pile. And it kind of goes back to that person asking about fungus. These soil microbes, bacteria and fungus are so awesome at breaking down chemicals and things like that. They need about, depends on the dewormer, but they need like 10 days is all they need of exposure to the fungus and bacteria in compost, and it'll break it down, and then it's fine.
Yeah, great. Jan also says great presentation.
Good, thank you.
Could I jump
Okay.
in for a second on that last question?
Sure. This is Sebastian. Go right
Yeah,
ahead.
hi, everybody. I'm Sebastian Chicanos with NRCS, and I'll be talking later with Brooke. But I just wanted to add to that. That's really great information about the wormer and how that breaks down in the compost pile. There are some concerns with certain herbicides that are commonly used on the hay fields that grow the hay that then actually can pass through the horse's body and then even pass through a compost pile without breaking down. And they can have,
Clopyralids.
Yes.
yeah, clopyralids, some other ones, even aminopyralid and aminocyclopyrachlor and picloram. But they're generally used on grass hay fields to kill broadleaf weeds in those hay fields, but they can also affect germination of broadleaf plants even after the composting process. So it's probably not a concern really for spreading that compost on a pasture. But one of the recommendations would be to use horse compost on either like perennial woody plants if you needed to compost in an orchard or around your landscaping, or for a lawn or a pasture
In other
arrangement,
words,
as
not on
opposed to
garden. Yeah.
yeah, and it's kind of actually impacted the market and the marketability of horse compost for like market gardens for veggie growers, because there have actually been more and more veggie growers who have put them down on their, like raised bed gardens or market garden for farmers market or whatnot, who then have germination issues, especially with their legumes like peas or beans or sunflower family plants. So, I guess that's just to say, you might run into that, and those are valid concerns of some farmers. And I wouldn't recommend putting it on your own. It's pretty expensive to test in a lab, but it's pretty easy if you're curious about your own compost. If you can't determine, what herbicides the farmers who grew the hay that you bought are using, you can just put some in a tray and try and germinate some like peas or beans in it. And then put some peas, the same seeds in another tray of just seed starting mix, and see if the little seedlings that come up look the same or if they look, yellow and impacted by it or not. So just wanted to add that in.
I might add
great.
that clopyralids are not legal in a lot of places anymore because of that.
Yeah. And sometimes you can check with your grower to see what they've sprayed, if they've sprayed anything on their fields, but sometimes you can't. So, yeah. Okay, so next question. Let's see, a clarification. I have to go back to, well, let me come back to that one. Okay, so Rachel asks, can we access your other courses via your website? They all look super interesting.
Yes, definitely. We have a lot of classes that we do regularly and that we have recordings of.
Great. Okay, and then Rick, who asked about the spreading the manure on the fields without composting, he did intend to mean no composting. So I think you answered his question pretty well. And Veronique says, thank you. So let's see, I think I got everybody's.
Yeah, and my website is Horses for Clean Water.
Oh, right. Yeah. And that'll be on the resource sheet as well.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, so just going to make one last check to see if there's any other questions that just came in. Okay, so our next presenter will be Morgan. Morgan, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Let me see if I can.
If you have trouble sharing your screen, I can promote you to co-host if you like.
All
There, it
right.
looks
Can you
like
guys see that?
Yeah,
Perfect.
it's great. Thanks for being here, Morgan.
Thank you for having me.
So this is Morgan Williams, and she is from the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. And take it away.
Thank you, Terry. Good afternoon, everyone. As she said, my name is Morgan Williams. I'm an environmental scientist at the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. I work in the planning division and I help administer our confined animal facilities program. So today I'll be providing an introduction to our office's confined animal facilities general permit. This quick session is relevant for folks local to the San Francisco Bay, especially people in Sonoma County within the Petaluma River watershed. And after this presentation, you can stick around to hear from the Sonoma RCD and the National Resource Conservation Service about their amazing resources for the ag community. Jumping right into it, the topics we'll be covering today are: who is the water board and why might your facility need a waste discharge permit? What does the general CAF permit require? What is a ranch plan? And what is the permit timeline? And to start off, I'd like to tell everyone a bit about the California water boards. We are a statewide agency responsible for protecting water quality and the beneficial uses of our waters. Beneficial uses are the uses of water necessary for the survival or well-being of humans, plants, and wildlife. And we have 9 regional boards throughout the state. The San Francisco Bay region is Region 2, and on this map on the screen, you can get a good sense of our boundary lines and what counties we encompass. In addition to ag-related activities, our agency implements and enforces a bunch of different types of water quality programs, such as construction and industrial stormwater permits, as well as programs for landfills, sewage treatment plants, groundwater remediation, just to name a few of them. And our authorities come from the Federal Clean Water Act, as well as California's Port of Cologne Water Quality Control Act, which is commonly referred to as the State Water Code. Also from the Water Quality Control Plan for the San Francisco Bay Basin. And when it comes to programs for grazing and confined animal facilities, we are implementing and enforcing the federal regulations, the statewide confined animal facility regulations, which are also known as Title 27, the California Water Code, and our basin plan. And the Federal Clean Water Act requires states to assess water quality and determine if standards are met and fix the problems if they're not. If standards are not met, a water gets listed as impaired and the process to develop a TMDL is triggered. I don't think it's worth our time to dive into what exactly a TMDL is, but in general, it examines a water quality problem and identifies the sources of the pollutants, and then it specifies actions to restore clean water. So within our region, we have 23 complete and active TMDLs and 5 more in various stages of development. And of those, 6 identify horses as one of the sources of pollution. The most recent one of these is the Petaluma River bacteria TMDL, which characterized the river's fecal bacteria problem. So with the Petaluma River, our regional board adopted a resolution approving the basin plan amendment for this TMDL on November 13th of 2019. And on June 2nd of 2020, the State Water Board of California approved the plan, establishing it for the Petaluma River. And the Petaluma River watershed is a 150 square mile watershed. So that's 150 square miles of land that all drain into the river and eventually into San Pablo Bay. During the sampling study for the river, water bacteria concentrations were significantly higher than the standards for safe recreational use. They're generally between 67% and 100% higher. And with these levels, activities like swimming and kayaking and fishing are all not safe for people. And here are the source tracking results. So our office conducted 2 rounds of something called microbial source tracking sampling in 2016, once in February, the wet season or in winter, and then once in June during the dry season. And this chart summarizes the results of those samplings in terms of percentage of samples that came back positive for a given host type. We looked for bacteria DNA markers from 4 different hosts: human, horse, dog, and cow, and all 4 markers were detected, indicating that all 4 sources contribute to the bacteria problem. The horse and cow markers were detected at higher frequencies than humans or dogs, especially in the summer. You can see 100% of the samples had horse hits. Also, the wet season hits or detections were higher than the dry season hits for human and dog markers, suggesting that stormwater runoff plays a large role in mobilizing those specific types of bacteria sources. And these samples were taken all throughout the watershed. I have a map of them here. They're the green little dots. And the study area included the upper watershed, the less developed areas, and sampling stations along the main stem as the river moves through the city. And it covered each drainage flowing to the river, including San Antonio Creek. And at all stations, the water quality standards were exceeded. And then again, at these stations, horse and cow markers were detected at higher frequencies than humans or dogs. And this finding is what in part triggered the confined animal facilities permit. So in our region, we have 2 kind of permit groups for animal sources. We're implementing 2 conditional waivers for grazing, one in Tamales Bay watershed and one for the Nampa River and Sonoma Creek watersheds. And a combined grazing waiver is currently being developed to bring in the Petaluma River watershed. And this type of permit has the rigor of requirements, even though it's titled as a waiver. And what's applicable to horse facilities, commercial horse facilities, is the general waste discharge requirements for confined animal facilities, which we also call the general CAF permit, CAF being an abbreviation for confined animal facilities. And this was renewed in June of 2016. It applies to all dairies across the bay and also pools and additional confined animal facilities within TMDL watersheds. And with this permit, the Regional Water Board really strived to develop a program that is both protective of water quality and practical to implement and mindful of costs for facility operators. And I'll briefly go over a summary of the permit requirements for the confined animal facilities permit. So state regulations are minimum standards that each region implement and enforce with their own permits. And in general, these standards require operators to divert clean stormwater away from areas with animals and or manure. A lot of the stuff that has been talked about in the great presentations this morning, containing manure bedding and stormwater contacting it, applying your solid and liquid waste at appropriate rates for soil and crops with no discharge. Manure bedding must also not be stockpiled or applied within 100 feet of surface waters unless there's an alternative protective practice used to prevent that from getting into the surface water. It also requires facilities to keep animals out of the creeks within confined areas and to contain non-storm water and other wastes like wash water. And it also requires facilities to manage their grazing lands if they have them to reduce bacteria and sediment runoff. And our program provides a comprehensive approach towards waste management, and it builds upon these standards in order to adequately protect both ground and surface waters. And for horse facilities, I have to enroll in this permit within the Petaluma River watershed. They fall into the Tier 1 category, and there are 2 main Tier 1 requirements. The primary component is what we call a ranch water quality plan. And the ranch water quality plan must be completed and implemented consistent with the technical standards specified in attachment B of the CAF order, which can be found on our program webpage, which I'll have linked at the end of the presentation. And the purpose of this plan is to demonstrate how your facility is meeting the requirements of the permit, both structurally and operationally. And it's due within 2 years of enrolling in the permit. And Tier 1 dischargers can complete a fair portion of their ranch water quality plans on their own, with only a few components requiring the assistance of a qualified professional. A copy of the ranch water quality plan must be kept at the facility and made available upon request by water board staff during inspections, which happen periodically during enrollment in the permit. And the plan is a document that includes a facility map and an evaluation of the facility's design and whether or not it meets the requirements of the permit. And then if there are improvements that need to be made, you come up with an implementation plan for improvements and describe the temporary measures that are put in place in the meantime until those improvements can be made. And it also includes a description of your regular pollution prevention practices for your confined areas, your waste storage areas, your grazing lands, and land application areas if you have them. And Sonoma RCD has developed a template for this plan as a part of a regional water board grant that they have with us. And this is the same grant that's funding the webinar today. And after my presentation, an RCD rep will be introducing the services that they offer related to this permit and in general to the local horse community. The other main requirement of this permit is establishing a water quality monitoring plan. And these requirements are laid out in attachment A of the permit, also on our website. It includes conducting visual inspections of your facility, which is as simple as walking through your facility and making sure that everything looks as it should. And it also includes a reporting requirement of sending in photos documenting that the facility's been winterized before the start of each wet season. The permit also requires annual surface water sampling. Permittees are required to sample 3 stormwater events annually, and then to be consistent with the grazing waivers, if you have 50 acres or more of grazing lands as a part of your commercial operation, then the residual dry matter of the grazing lands has to be measured once a year to help inform your management. And there is an option for individual or group or watershed-based monitoring. At this time, there's not an existing monitoring group in Petaluma, but if anyone is interested in organizing one, they can reach out to the water board, get in touch with me, and we can talk about what that entails. And then if your runoff samples are below the permit benchmarks for 2 years in a row, the permit includes an option for applying for reduced sampling. And this slide summarizes the major planning and implementation milestones required under the permit. So enrollment letters are sent out by the Regional Water Board, and they include the enrollment form, which is called the Notice of Intent. And enrolling in the permit also requires a one-time $200 state enrollment fee. And then once a facility is enrolled, there may or may not be an annual state fee, which depends on the number of animals that you have. So for facilities with less than 75 horses, there's no annual fee, only the initial $200 filing fee. And for facilities with 75 to 100 horses, currently the annual fee is $939. And for 150 to 500 horses, it is $1,876. And these fees change each year according to what the state board decides. And they're posted around September of each year on their fee website. And starting in winter 2024, for people who enroll in this permit, the facilities monitoring and reporting program must be developed and implemented. And those are the water quality monitoring and visual inspection components I mentioned on the last slide. And by 2025, upon completing your second year of enrollment, the ranch water quality plan must be completed. And if at this time there's still structural improvements that are needed to bring your facility into compliance, then the plan has to include a schedule, and you need to provide a written request for an extension. And then starting your first year of enrollment, facility owners or operators are required to complete and submit an annual report form by November 30th of each year. And we send out annual reminders with a copy of the annual report form, and either owners or operators will fill this out. You include your water quality sampling results and your photos showing the winterization of the facility, and you update us on the status of your management plan and any ongoing facility improvements. And so if you are someone who has to enroll in this permit, this time period has passed for most people, but you have to file your notice of intent within 90 days of receiving your notice. And your tasks for this year of 2023 are to start developing your monitoring plan and your ranch water quality plan. The details of what those exactly are can be found in attachment A and B of the confined animal facility order, which is again on our website, and I'll have the link on the next slide. And in fall, you can prepare your facility for winter by removing manure from areas exposed to rain, eliminate wash water discharges, and assess your facility for any potential problem areas that perhaps should be addressed first upon enrollment in this facility. And you're going to submit your first annual report by November 30th, 2023. And of note is that this first annual report for folks who are brand new to the permit program, you do not have to have your water quality samples included in it. There's a section for it, but you can leave it blank because this is your first year. Most people just enrolled this, I was going to say spring, but I guess we're still kind of in winter. And so you did not sample this last season, so you have nothing to report. But in the years following, you'll need to be prepared to conduct those samplings once the winter season begins. And that is all I have for today. So I have my contact information on the screen. Feel free to call me or shoot me an email if you have any questions about the permits or compliance. I'm happy to provide assistance with completing any of the forms or answer any questions you may have about what the exact requirements of the permit are. Thank you all for sticking with me through that presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Morgan, there are a few questions.
Mm-hmm.
One is from Rick. What strains or types of bacteria are considered concerning?
This Petaluma bacteria TMDL focused on fecal bacteria. So that was E. coli in freshwater and Enterococcus bacteria in the more estuarine kind of saltwater type portions of the lower part of Petaluma River. And in general, most of our bacteria TMDLs, I believe, are all fecal bacteria TMDLs.
Great, thank you. And then one from Michael Murphy. Morgan, the first slide was Sonoma Horse Park, the facility that it took 2 years for me to eliminate the lawsuit by San Francisco Bay Keepers. Why have we not received the annual report? All my clients have not gotten one this year. Kindly, Michael Murphy.
I don't know what annual report you're referring to. It would,
maybe he
yeah.
could reach out to you.
Yeah,
Is your
Michael,
contact-
my number's on the screen and I think you have it. I know we've spoken before. Feel free to give me a call and we can sort out what's happening there because I'm not sure what you're talking about.
Thanks,
Can you
Morgan.
hear me?
Yeah, there he is. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Hi, Morgan. Nice to see you. I didn't realize how young you were.
Yeah.
Say
Yeah.
hi.
A
Say
few
hi
years out
to.
of college.
Say hi to Lori for me.
They'll do.
Okay. What we usually get an annual report every year. I'm dealing with Halleck Creek, Dixon Ranch, Sonoma Horse Park, and I'm not sure if I have any other ones in the pike. But normally we get an annual report because I have all my clients testing their water during every rain event.
Oh,
And
are you talking about the annual report form that we mail out to enrollees?
correct.
And Sonoma Horse Park did not get one this year.
None of my clients in Marin received one either.
Really? Okay. Let's
Call
hop on
me.
the phone after this session and we'll sort that out.
Okay, because we've been testing water and I had no place to put it but on the wall of the barns.
Glad you have it at least. Yeah, we'll figure that out. Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions right at the moment. So thank you, Morgan, very much.
Again, thank you guys for having me. Let me stop sharing my screen real quick.
All right. And then we're going to introduce Carrie Wester from Sonoma RCD. Carrie, are you available?
I am. Good
Yay.
afternoon. Let's see. I will share my screen and see if this goes smoothly here.
And I just want to say, you'll probably say this, Carrie, but just to all the folks still attending the webinar, Carrie's from this area, but this can apply to RCDs everywhere around the country.
Okay, I just want to confirm that you're seeing the slideshow version. Is that
Yep,
look
looks
accurate?
good. Yep.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Sorry I couldn't attend the whole day today. I'm recovering from being sick and trying to save my voice and energy. So, but I am here now. So, as Terry mentioned, my name is Carrie Wester. I'm a project manager with the Sonoma Resource Conservation District, which I'll talk a little bit about I know that there's probably some folks tuning in from out of the area. But I am going to focus today on services that the RCD offers and specific to funding for branch water quality plans that would comply with the regulatory permit that Morgan just talked about. Okay, this is just a map of Sonoma County. Again, that's where Sonoma RCD is based. For folks who might not be in the area. So Northern California, north of San Francisco here. Sonoma RCD shares the county with another RCD called Goldridge RCD. We're both outlined in red on the map there, just to give you a sense of our geographical areas. And the different shaded areas represent different watersheds. And we typically work in with programs within specific watersheds, specifically this one too, within the Petaluma River watershed that I'll talk about. But that just gives you a little bit of context of where we're located within California. And then a little bit of background on Sonoma RCD and then kind of RCDs in general. If you're tuning in from outside of California, they might be referred to as soil conservation services, similar to NRCS that's going to speak after me, I believe. So there's typically resources within your area too. It might just not be called a resource conservation district. But in general, the RCDs were created in the 1940s to assist landowners with various types of technical, educational, and financial resources, mostly for soil and water conservation projects and programs. Sonoma RCD has been active assisting landowners in our county for the last 75 years. So we have a pretty long history of being active within our area. The RCDs are non-regulatory, so we kind of act as almost like an in-between between regulatory agencies and landowners in order to provide landowners the assistance needed to comply with regulatory permits. One unique thing about RCDs is that majority of our funding is grant funded, so we can actually identify and solicit funding based on priorities within our specific communities. The specific grant that we applied for and received for this funding was something that we knew was a need in the community. And so we sought funding to assist equine landowners for that reason. And our specific RCD, we have I think about 15 staff on staff with a wide variety of natural resource and agricultural disciplines. We have foresters, we have erosion control experts, engineers, and then kind of all around generalists like myself. One of the programs that I'll focus on just for this talk today is our regional conservation planning program that we refer to as our Land Smart planning program. It's a regional program with several other RCDs in the area originally developed to assist folks with water quality issues and concerns, and we have kind of branched that out beyond water quality to kind of focus on carbon sequestration as well. But today we'll mostly focus on water quality needs. So our LandSmart program, the purpose is to assist landowners in accomplishing their natural resource goals. And in some cases, there is a regulatory component to it where we're also helping them either meet or exceed environmental regulations that might be present in their area. We also provide the technical assistance and financial support to look for funding to implement practices that have been identified in plans. One of the components of a plan that I like to highlight, just because if you're more of a visual person like myself, I think it's kind of tells you a little bit more about our plans and what they include. But the mapping component of our plans, we feel like it's very helpful and it's very useful for folks who are visual people. But basically, we're looking at properties, equine facilities in this case, and inventorying kind of everything that's going on that facility with regard to the slope, excuse me, the slope and soil types, to the pastures, buildings, how you manage your manure, how the facility drains, excuse me. And any roads or crossings you might have on the facility. Of course, I'm going to start coughing. So we have all of our templates for different plans located on our LandSmart website, which is, excuse me, available for anyone to view. We have different land uses of templates, including vineyard, forest land, and rangeland. And specifically for this one, it would be confined animal or equine facilities. This page just highlights the additional information for equine facilities specific to this grant and this program. We have the plan template in different forms, PDF and a fillable, Word document and fillable PDFs, as in addition to monitoring templates that are required under the water board permit. And there's also a link to the water board website and documents associated with the permit there. And anybody can look at this. It's public. So the specific funding opportunity that we have right now is to assist folks with funding of these ranch water quality plans that Morgan was detailing. The funding comes from the US EPA through the State Water Board through their 319H grant program, specific for commercial confined animal facilities within the Petaluma River watershed at the moment. And we provide education regarding these water quality issues and again, help develop these plans in order to help folks comply with the regulatory permit. And this is just kind of reiterating the geographical area that our funding applies to currently. So this is highlighting the Petaluma River watershed within Sonoma County here. So the process with, if folks are interested, if this is something that you feel like it might apply to you, would definitely be to reach out to me at the RCD to express your interest, and definitely if you might have received a letter or a notice of intent from the water board, I would definitely reach out to us to express interest if that's something you're interested in doing. Kind of the first step is we conduct have conversations with landowners and conduct site visits to start gathering information about your specific facility, the size of it, kind of the specifics of your operation. And then we work with landowners to develop that plan where we're not only identifying what's working for the facility, but then also identifying areas that might need assistance. We do require a cost share as part of this. It gives you a sense of, excuse me, depending on the size and operation of your facility, what it may be. We do have waivers available if there's a financial burden there. Excuse me. That is all I had today. So I am happy to answer any questions. And again, sorry for my coughing.
A lot of stuff going around. So far, there are no questions that are coming up unless Kirsten sees any I'm missing.
I do not.
Okay.
Okay. And
All
I
right.
know that Terry, you're going to provide my information to folks. So if there are
Yes.
follow-up questions, feel free to email me or give me a call.
Yeah. I'll be sending out your information. Thank you, Carrie. Okay, and now we have Brooke Pippi and Sebastian Chicanos from the NRCS. Are you guys ready?
I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can I-
there you are. Hi.
Yep, ready.
Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to share my screen here. Let's hope this works.
Okay.
Can everyone see that?
Yes, looking good.
Great, great. So I'm just going to take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Brooke Pippi. I'm an agricultural engineer with the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service. I am stationed out of Petaluma, California, north part of San Francisco, and our office serves both Sonoma and Marin counties. But I do want to mention that we are a national organization, and there are field offices all across the nation and in in all U.S. territories. So there is definitely resources available for people who are interested in getting them. Sebastian?
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. I'm Sebastian Chicanos. I'm a rangeland management specialist here in the same office in Petaluma, California. And yeah, we'd be happy to work with anybody on either technical service advice or some of our programs that we're going to cover more in this presentation.
We'll get right started here. So NRCS stands for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and we are under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We used to be called the Soil Conservation Service. We were formed in the 1930s after the Dust Bowl, and the federal government really wanted our presence on the private landscape to offer technical assistance to farmers and ranchers because of the devastating effects of the Dust Bowl. As Carrie described in her earlier presentation, we co-evolved with the resource conservation districts or the soil conservation districts or the soil and water conservation districts that are available again throughout the nation. There may or may not be active staff for those districts, but they all do exist. And the Dust Bowl was really where we started our agency's science work in soil health and erosion. And in the 1990s, we changed our name to the Natural Resources Conservation Service to really embrace in our name the agency's mission of looking at all on-farm natural resources that include soil, water, plants, animals, air, and humans, as well as energy and other resources that we recognize as important to these operations. Anything you want to add, Sebastian?
No, I guess I just kind of sum that up too in saying that, you know, we're here to support basically environmental benefits, natural resource issues and improvements, and also the sustainability of American agriculture and, including equine operations. So it generally, the projects that we work on can have both a positive effect on, the business that you're running, and as well as public benefit to the environment.
Like the RCDs, we are voluntary and non-regulatory. We are a very special government organization. There's not many agencies in the federal government that operate the way that we do. We are science-based and offer both technical assistance or advice and to landowners. We also have financial assistance programs that are authorized through legislation that comes through Congress every few years, and that legislation is called the Farm Bill. We are going into a new Farm Bill come this October 1st of 2023. So we are finishing up the 2018 Farm Bill, and we will be moving into the 2023 Farm Bill come October 1st of this year. All of our premise of offering both technical assistance and financial assistance is rooted in something that we call a conservation plan. That is an individual plan that is developed for your specific operation that again looks at and assesses all of the on-farm resources that you have and what's going on farm. We also have internally a slew of professional experts and specialists. So everything from soil health, crop advisors and agronomists to myself, engineers, and Sebastian, range management specialists. We also have health, foresters and soil health experts as well. So there's a vast array of support network that is internal that we offer with our services. We are also voluntary and it's free to request our assistance, but that is the important part is you as the landowner or the land operator need to reach out to us to engage and start those conversations. Sebastian?
I think that was great.
Okay. This is just it's an older slide from the previous 2014 Farm Bill, but this just shows you that we are heavily investing in American agriculture. We also employ a large number of people through all of those specialists positions that we do offer as part of our conservation support services. And then our services are always free. So if you are just interested in technical assistance on how to do something, we have resources internally and online that can help you develop a plan to reach all of those goals. And these are just some numbers it's in the billions. So I always like to show that there is activity and money that is spent on the ground through our programs every year, and that we do develop and support jobs that are created locally to provide local expertise. That's really important when you're talking about different microclimates and soil types and groundwater issues. You really want to have that local expertise that's available and that's aware of the issues that are relevant to the community. Our main financial assistance program is a program called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and it works with all agricultural producers, and that includes equine facilities and non-industrial forest landowners. And as I previously mentioned, we really start with a conversation, you either calling us or coming into the office and engaging in, I'm interested in this, or can you help me with that? And then we usually do what is a site visit with the landowner or the operator so that we can walk the property, look at what's going on, and look at what the resource concerns that you may have, or the resource opportunities that we have to enhance upon. And then we look at options that are available and feasible to address those concerns. We really try to be very site specific, because that is what works the best for, this is not a one size fits all, but we also try and look at all of the alternatives that might be reasonable, and then look at what alternatives may or may not be feasible for the landowner or the operation to actually include in a future plan moving forward. This is a lengthy process to access our financial assistance dollars. And it really can come after a lot of the planning has been started. The planning will lay out the roadmap, if you will, to the pathway to financial assistance, if that is something that the landowner is interested in. We do offer over 700 conservation practices, each with their own subcomponents that are designed to capture all of the activities related to conservation work that can go on farm. And if we do offer financial assistance and technical assistance, then those assistance drawings or recommendations really do have to meet our internal NRCS standards and specifications for those conservation practices. Our internal NRCS standards and specifications have been developed over time, and are very robust. We are a national agency, so a lot of times these standards have to be applicable across the nation, which can render some challenges. Sebastian?
Yeah, I guess I would just add a couple of things. One is, there's limited funding. I mean, the billions of dollars that Brooke just mentioned sounds like a lot, but when you spread it across the whole country, it ends up, somewhat being limited, and there's tends to be a lot of interest. So it's actually a sort of a competitive ranking process that you go through. We basically put together the plans for all of the landowners who are interested, and depending on the funding available, some of them may not get funded that year, but then they could be reapplied the next year. So that might vary from conservation district to, county to county across the country, how much interest there is and how much funding is available. But just be aware of that process, that it's not exactly a guarantee, but there are often good odds that the funding can become available.
And it is a process. It's often a multi-month process from the time that you pick up the phone or walk through our door to actually getting a plan that's ready to be submitted for funding, if that's what you're interested in. No invoices are necessary. So we have internally decided what we will offer to people that are interested in, say, planting a hedgerow or doing some mulching on farm. And so once we've developed a conservation plan that's site specific, that's related to the goals of the operation, then we can look at opportunities to provide or ask for funding. We are located in California, and I will say that the state has offered through some of the programs they've developed in recent years, a lot of support for conservation planning. And that is something that we look at trying to partner with as much as possible with the RCD, with our federal dollars, to help provide additional assistance to these efforts to close some of the cost share gaps that may be shouldered by the private individual landowners. Like I said, we have a large we have a large suite of conservation practices. So we can look at things on farm that include nutrient management, and that involves where waste is generated, where it's stored, how long is it stored there, and then where it's utilized after that. It looks at soil health and pasture health as well. So it really tries to look at all of your nutrient uses and losses and sources on farm. So that can be really helpful when people are looking at, am I applying too much horse manure in a certain area? Do I need to spread it out? And what rotation maybe do I have available to me to do that? We do cover crop rotation, we do mulching, we do hedgerow plantings, we do all sorts of heavy use area protection, soil protection for erosion control. So there are a lot of options available to people for conservation work and practices that can be looked at to address insect health, biodiversity on the headquarters, all sorts of things basically related to the site-specific conditions in the land and the landowner operator's goals. We also do a lot of pasture management and grass management and soil health management. So again, there's a plethora of things to look at and to try and craft nature-based, process-based solutions so that you're not working against gravity, you know, all the whole time. Sebastian, anything you want to add?
No, not at this moment.
All right, I'm going to talk really quick because I will let Sebastian take this away, but our programs offer a lot of grazing support infrastructure. What we don't offer is support to create business operations and certain support to things that aren't related to really natural resource benefit or addressing those natural resource concerns. But what we do on grazing lands is quite a lot, and I will let Sebastian take it from here. Oops, sorry.
Sure. So, I mean, as you can see, there's like a solar powered water pump and tank here in this photo. There's some fencing, water troughs, do things like weed management and whatnot. One of the challenges for horse properties in particular, because our agency is more set up really for like large scale ranching operations or dairies or those types of ag operations. But with horse operations, it can be a challenge comes up that we basically require that there be some type of grazing management plan in place that won't overly overgraze the pasture that is there. So that can be somewhat challenging or something that we just have to look at and overcome, because if you have 5 horses on 2 acres and they're just overgrazing it all the time, they have access all the time, we aren't going to basically put money after a problem that's impossible to solve, like weed management or something, when it's being continuously overgrazed. So by having those kind of confinement areas, like Alayne was talking about, and limiting the access to those pastures, then we actually can get somewhere and look at improving the health of the pasture. And so there's kind of those iterative steps. Another one that Brooke can maybe speak to more is going through a comprehensive nutrient management plan, which may have many of the same aspects as the water management plan that Morgan was speaking about, but thinking about how manure is going to be processed, stored, and where it's going to be distributed. And that's sort of the first step in our planning process to eventually looking at even infrastructure improvements to like the barn areas, like even potentially like gutters on barn roofs or underground outlets similar to the French drains or the swales that have been talked about earlier in this presentation, are things that we could look at. You know, again, there's like issues that have to be addressed on the way there, like the barn structure has to be meet our standards and specifications to be structurally sound enough to support a gutter system. But if it is, adding those gutters is something that we could potentially help support. So kind of, you know, whatever you're thinking about in terms of improvements is something to talk to your local NRCS office about, and just take it one step at a time, and they may be able to help.
I'm so glad Sebastian brought up getting a comprehensive nutrient management or just a nutrient management plan. But that, again, this is a plan that identifies all of your sources of waste and waste sources, its storage, and then its destination. And we do look a lot at housing and roofs and where freshwater drainage is coming and going through the property. We also look at the housing itself. Is that potentially a source of contamination, or is manure management something that's able to be done effectively and efficiently? And when it is raining, is manure contained and controlled? So like Sebastian said, when we really look at doing gutters and manure management activities, including compost bunker facilities, as Alayne described, it really does start with a comprehensive nutrient management plan. We have to understand what is the volume of nutrients that is being generated on farm, and then what is currently the baseline condition of how those are being managed. And that analysis and evaluation will then often lay the floor plan for what is available to look at and feasible for the operation to do, that again isn't going to increase operational costs astronomically so that it becomes infeasible, and that you can have more nutrients available to use on farm, so that your nutrient cycle is kept closer to home. We do infrastructure for animal confined housing, although that is very particular. It has its own process to go through, but we do offer practices related to that. Again, composting areas, roof over composting facilities, and again, the floors of the composting themselves, including as well as rain gutters, downspouts, and then lined waterways to address freshwater drainage systems to get them away from manured areas and surfaces. Anything you want to add, Sebastian, before I move on?
Move on to the next slide. Okay.
I'm really just going to take a quick minute to go over program eligibility. There are some eligibility requirements. If you are seeking financial assistance through our office, technical assistance is always available and is free to you. But for our financial assistance programs, EQIP and others, you must be an agricultural producer. Equine facilities are included in that, and or a private non-industrial forest landowner. You also must demonstrate that you have control of the land for the time period that we will be engaging for doing conservation work on your property. There are also some income qualifications that people must meet for receiving program funds. And as you can see on the slide, that's an average of less than $900,000 for the 3 previous years, tax years. And if you want more information on that, Sebastian and I can go into that in more detail. We do have some special considerations for beginning farmers and historically underserved farmers that do have some special provisions provided to them, written in the rules of the Farm Bill. So one of those special provisions can be an advance payment. If you do engage in a contract with us to receive federal financial assistance, then there can be some mechanisms to help receive upfront money to help then start to do the project that we've all agreed upon that you would like to do. Anything you want to?
No, that's okay. I think we've only got a few minutes left. So.
Okay. This is the process of engaging with us. You come into our office, you can or cannot apply for programs. We develop a conservation plan. then like Sebastian said, it is ranked in our internal system to receive funding. If it does receive funding, it's signed into contract. We do have to do internal reviews to make sure that all the projects we provide federal dollars to are complying with all requirements of the Endangered Species Act and the Historic Preservation Act. But we have the internal staff to do that. That is not something that you have to do, or it's not something that the landowner, that would open up the landowner to other agency involvement. It is all internal and it is done with our staff. Once the clearances are given and the project is then installed, after the project installed, NRCS comes out and verifies installation and installed quantities, and then we start the process to certify for payment. But it is a after the fact reimbursement for the most part. Again, if you are a beginning farmer or historically underserved, there can be some special provisions in there, but it is a post implementation reimbursement process. And then once we can verify quantities, again, the landowner, the practice is certified and the landowner can expect to receive payment after that step has been completed. This is Sebastian and I's contact information. Please feel free to reach out. There is also a ton of information on our California NRCS website, as well as our national program website. So if you are interested in maybe standards and specifications for roof runoff systems, they are there. It may take a little digging to find, and I'm happy to help anyone directly that's interested in looking at, again, what our practices may offer and what may be involved in other resources that we have available. Sebastian?
No, I think that was great. I was just looking at some of the questions in the chat that maybe we could go over.
You go right ahead.
You want me to read them out, or would you like to do it, Sebastian?
That'd be great, Terry.
Okay. So Frank is asking, given their charter and focus, can the NRCS get involved in projects that are strictly driven by water quality concerns with private landowners?
And I would say, yes, that is a one of the natural resource concerns that we can address. So the more that we can incorporate other resource concerns at the same time, the better. But even just a water quality project is definitely on a possibility.
Okay, great. And Michael's asking, are the NMPs going to be updated for the equine? They are now geared towards bovine. Does that make sense?
Yes. Go ahead, Sebastian.
I was gonna say I'll let you answer that.
Yes, I do believe that that may be an issue. However, I know that we have engaged in financial assistance with horse facilities, so it may be that we would have to just take a closer look at how do we do that. But there is opportunity to capture in some of the language, I think, horse facility operations effectively. I'm happy to talk to you more directly about that situation.
Great. And then Rick is asking, is there a template for the CNMP, Comprehensive Nutrient Management Plan, for non-commercial property owners?
So the Comprehensive Nutrient Management Plan really, and how it differs from a nutrient management plan, I would say, is that the Comprehensive Nutrient Management Plan really has a lot more waste management infrastructure that's involved. Let's say you're looking at a large dairy with a series of waste storage ponds. That would require engineering evaluation of those storage ponds. And so that's really what triggers a comprehensive nutrient management plan. But anyone can come in for any nutrient management plan as long as you are a commercial, an agricultural producer. You have to be producing fiber, forage, or I don't remember what it is, but there used to be income verification, like you had to show that you were receiving income, but you have to show that you are an agricultural producer. You have to be producing an agricultural commodity. And equine is included in that, as is private non-industrial forest land. So I'm not sure if that answers the question.
And that includes for non-commercial property owners, if they are producers, but they're non-commercial.
That is my understanding.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sort of hesitant to say the yes, but
I believe so. And also for those who are watching who aren't in this area, you should definitely talk with your local NRCS office, because some of the policies do vary from a state to state and even county to county a little bit, or region to region. There is some variation within the agency in terms of how they interpret different rules and requirements. So I would just encourage you to speak with your local NRCS office about these things.
And Rick is clarifying, if you produce a pasture that your horses graze on, would that be considered?
yes.
Okay. All right.
Provided we have resource concerns to address, and usually soil health can be a resource concern that we look at addressing, or pasture health. So yes.
Great. And then just one comment that I have that I always like to bring up every year is that both the NRCS and the RCDs are non-regulatory agencies. And so I know that there are a lot of people who are afraid to have quote unquote government officials come onto their property and fear getting fined for not doing something up to snuff or whatever it is. But both the RCD and the NRCS do not have a fining. They do not issue fines for compliance. Is that correct?
Yes, Terry,
Okay,
thank you.
okay,
That is
yeah.
correct. We actually really help landowners achieve actions that will head towards compliance if that is a concern.
Mhm. Terrific. Let's see if there's anything. Oh, yes. So there is Pam asks, I planned on this event ending time and need to go, but plan on attending tomorrow. Okay. Thanks, Pam. There's just a note to us. I am not seeing any other questions right now, but as we prepare to close out, does anybody have any comments they'd like to share? Any of the panelists have any comments?
And I just, this is a little last minute, I know we have to
Yeah.
go, but I just wanted to mention something that I was thinking about getting ready for this. And it was just kind of thinking about where all of these nutrients are coming from that are a concern. And it's largely because we're importing feed into our horse operations. Most people aren't entirely relying on grazing lands for the horses, but bringing on hay and sometimes supplemental feed to them. And just like looking at some of those numbers, if horses are eating, like, these are very rough numbers, but like 30 pounds of hay per day, that's 10,950 pounds per year. And let's say they're eating grass hay, which is 8% protein, that's 876 pounds of protein per year. And let's say they're getting 2 pounds of supplemental feed at 30% protein, which is pretty high for a supplemental feed, but not totally unreasonable. That's like another 219 pounds of protein per year that's coming onto your property, which is 1,095 pounds protein, which, if protein is about 16% nitrogen, sorry if I'm geeking out too hard, but
That's all right.
that's 175 pounds of nitrogen per horse per year that's you're bringing onto your farm. That's essentially going through them and coming out either as urine or manure. And 175 pounds protein of nitrogen is a lot of nitrogen. Like what your pasture would need to grow well for most types of grass pasture is about 30 to 35 pounds of nitrogen per year. So per acre. So that's, you know, if you have 175 pounds that you're spreading, you're going to want to do that over multiple acres, you know, and that's just per horse. So that's where they get into recommendations of, you know, needing like 2 acres, 2.5 acres per horse for the manure or compost from the manure to be spread. Which if you don't have that, you know, thinking about exporting that compost. But anyways, it's just sort of, I think some people, you know, sometimes they're like, well, they're just eating grass and they're pooping it and it's going back onto grass, but you're bringing in so much nitrogen in the form of hay. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, excellent point that we don't often think about, or maybe
Very
hardly
good
ever.
point.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Alayne, you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I do, but I seem to be squeaky.
That's okay.
I guess I'll leave it at that. I can't squeak it anymore.
Thank you for bearing up and doing this anyway.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Frank Blaha is saying, great webinar. Rick, I think, is asking another question. Do any panelists have information regarding equestrian California or federal trail specification? So, for example, slope, to address potential erosion issues potentially impacting watersheds or safety or other concerns? It's an interesting question.
I would say, yes, we do. I would, if he wants specific information, I'm happy to, if you reach out to me via email or telephone, I'm happy to send you some specifications and some of our standards that would probably help with that. And then Alayne, go ahead.
Man, I just can't talk anymore. I'll send us out to everybody. How about that?
Great, great.
Okay. Sorry, guys.
It's all right.
Anything else?
Veronique is saying, thank you for excellent presentations. That was very nice. I hope everyone has enjoyed this webinar and at least gotten something from it that's useful to you in your situation. So thank you everyone for being here. And I'm going to stay on. When we're ready to close out, I'll close everything out, but I'll stay online in case there are any follow-up questions that people have, or unless people have comments that they'd like to share so that we can make it better next time. But there are a couple more that just came in, so I'll read them. There are trail standards. Frank's saying there are trail standards and a national trail summit is coming up in, I don't remember where, but can send you details after. That would be great, Frank. That would be great. And if you want to send those to me, then I can get those out to everyone. And Robin says, wonderful webinar close to my heart. We are in the process of restoring over 6,000 acres of land in northern New Mexico. Yay. And create a community with permaculture. It's a daunting task. This was helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Robin. I want to talk to you about that maybe more. And Rick saying, great job to all. Thank you, Rick. And Michael saying, thank you, Michael Murphy. Thanks, Michael. Appreciate everybody's comments. Okay. Anybody else have last thoughts?
Just a big thank you to Terry for organizing. Thanks, Terry.
Yeah, Terry.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you, Terry.
You're welcome. My pleasure. My pleasure. So thankful all of you guys could join us today. Thanks. Really appreciate it.
Great. Good job, everybody.
Yeah. Good job.
All right.
Thanks
Take
all.
care.
Okay.
Take care,
Oh.
everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
I'll stay on for a few minutes as everybody closes out.